All right, good evening, everyone. It is Monday, February 4th, 2019. It's 7:03. At this point, I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. We have, let's see, start with our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. All right, a few announcements at the top here. We have quite a few seats up for re-election. We have 2 Board of Selectmen seats, 1 Hamilton Wenham Library Trustee, 1 for the Board of Assessors, 3 for the Planning Board, 1 for the Housing Authority, 1 for Town Moderator, and 3 for the Hamilton Wenham School Committee. Nomination papers for all those are available at the Town Clerk's office during office hours. With the exception of the School Committee, the papers are available at the Superintendent's office. All papers signed with at least 40 signatures for certification due back to the Clerk's office before February 21st. We have a few board and committee openings as well. 1 for the Board of Health, 3 positions for the Open Space Committee. I believe we are talking about one of them tonight, and I think there are 2 others as well that will be coming up soon. And then Town Hall Building Committee, 2 positions as well. All right, and now at this point in time, we have a section for public comment. If anybody wants to come up and say something, come right up to the microphone and say who you are and say what you want to say.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Dunbar, and I live here in Hamilton. And I wanted to bring to your attention something perhaps you already know, but it has to do with policy in the police department. And I have to say quickly, before I say anything more about that, I'm not talking about people in the police department. I'm talking about policies. The people in the police department, I think we're very fortunate to have, and I have no problems with them. But policies, over the last few years, I've had an amazing kind of dialogue with people in the police department. And the main one has to do with what happens to needles and syringes that are used. According to what one can find on the computer, Hamilton is the only small town in the North Shore that does not have a collection by the police department. And I have had needles and syringes in my house for 7 years. They mounted up in the garage because I went to the police department about it. I talked to them about it. They said no, they didn't collect them. They finally did tell me that Beverly Hospital does. And I have actually I've taken most of mine to Beverly Hospital. I will also tell you that I know how expensive it is to get rid of needles and syringes. And it's probably very inappropriate for somebody in Hamilton to be filling the container at Beverly Hospital. And I don't understand why we don't have it. And I think not just for legal medication giving in the home, but also the illegal drugs. If you take walks around here, you will find needles and syringes on our streets. You probably in the playgrounds. I don't know, but don't think we don't have them. You need to take a look. And I think the police need to be involved with it. And they aren't. Then the other policy has to do with rabid animals. And I had a cat who caught a bat in my house and killed it. I heard some noise and the downstairs and went to look, and this poor dear old cat had caught a bat, and I felt terrible about it. I felt terrible about the bat, because bats are having a bad time. But obviously the bat was flying very low, and I had the garage door open and had been running about and probably let it in, but it was dead. I did 2 calls. I did one to my vet eventually, which was his rabies up to date, because bats carry rabies. The other one I did to the police department, because she said the police will take it. The police wouldn't take it. The police wouldn't take it because I was told that if the cat hadn't killed it, if I had just come home and found the bat dead in the house, they would take it. But because the cat killed it, probably died from the cat, not from rabies. But the thing is, it probably didn't, because it was flying very low, so it obviously was sick. Now, bats are sick. We're getting a lot of problems with bats. I feel terrible about them, and I felt terrible that it was dead. They're amazing little creatures, and they don't bother me. But I didn't understand. They told me I had to wrap up that bat, jump in the car, and drive to Jamaica Plain with a bat myself if I was interested in finding out whether the bat had rabies.
Seems
That's
like a long way to
silly. Pardon?
I said, seems like a long way to drive.
I buried it, yeah.
So it looks like 2 things. One is a needle receptacle at the public safety building.
Yes.
We can talk to Chief Stevens about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
drop off. Like
They may need some help with the Board of Health. I don't know why they don't, and I never have quite figured out why the police have it, except for the illegal drugs and things like that. I understand that, but in all towns, it's the police department.
We'll look into that. We'll also look into, every year they do a prescription drug or drug drop-off at.
Yes, they do.
I wonder if they can kind of coordinate efforts
I asked
for both
about
things.
that, yeah.
So we'll talk to Chief about that. The other thing, I'm not sure the police policy on that, maybe you can even answer it on animal control.
We have very poor animal control in Hamilton. We have somebody to call, but it's poorly done. By the way, when I told my veterinarian about what the answer was, that I had to take the bat myself to the labs in Boston, she just sat there with her mouth open and said, "I have never heard of such a thing."
I'm glad you didn't end up with your cat having rabies, that's for sure.
He had everything else. He was a sick little cat. And the idea that he could catch a bat made him feel very happy. But it just didn't make me feel very happy.
Well, thank you for coming down and telling us about this. We'll follow up on it, so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And please remember, I'm not criticizing the police department.
No, I didn't get that from you at all.
Okay, I love them. I think they're great. I think
We're a
we're
bit
very,
biased
very
too,
lucky
so.
with them.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
Anybody else for a public comment? Okay. Moving on to Selectmen Town Manager reports. We'll start with Selectmen reports, and then we'll move on to, we have some special guests at the table. If you haven't noticed already, we have Rick Mitchell from the Planning Board, as well as the Chair, Brian Stein, with us tonight. And they're going to talk to us in just a few minutes here. So let's start over here. Jeff, do you have any updates for us?
Just a couple quickly. Eastern veterans, Eastern Essex veterans. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago. Nothing really new to report or update on. We do have our budget meeting coming up this Wednesday, so I'll have those budget numbers hopefully after Wednesday night that we can kind of insert. I know you all met Saturday to talk about that. And then I attended the Hamilton Development Corporation's open forum for the downtown business area, Railroad Avenue, and Brian, Rick, feel free to interject, but I mean, my takeaway was that, first of all, there's really good attendance from the merchants, which was really nice to see. And I think the takeaway was, some of the designs that HDC had put together were very nice. But I think really what people were looking for are just some of the basics, just really let's get down to some brass tacks, get those sidewalks addressed, get some period lighting addressed, and get some signage addressed. I think it came down to kind of those three kind of components that people were most interested in seeing in the immediate future anyway.
Kind of aesthetics type of stuff.
Yeah, it's things that weren't...
I mean, sidewalks functional too.
Right, true.
Right. And they need it. Whether aesthetically or not, they need it. They're in rough condition. There are a variety of different types of sidewalks in town. I think it's working with Wenham to figure out how we can get a sidewalk for that part of Railroad Avenue, which is actually in Wenham, but it looks as though and feels as though and works as though it's in Hamilton. So I think that those were the kind of the takeaways I had from that meeting. But I think it was good discussion, good ideas on the table. But I think it comes down to some of just the brass tacks, some of the low-hanging fruit. Sidewalks and lighting isn't inexpensive, but I don't think it needs to be in the millions of dollars either. So, but it was a good forum. That's it.
Yeah, the other thing that came out of it was, the downtown's always had semi-active group of merchants between Hamilton and Wenham, and that's sounds like it's slowed down a bit. So there were a number of people there, a number of owners there that want to get something started. That was the other reason we had the meeting, was to help facilitate something like that and re-energize that and see if we can help them out to do that. So that there was some urgency behind that from a number of people. So hopefully that can start in the near future, and we can have a more active, not Chamber of Commerce, but just merchants and owners group. So,
Great. Scott.
Sure. A few things. FinCom, we had our joint meeting. Jeff, quick update on that. It was very good. Great info provided by Joe and Marissa. And we asked the FinCom to give us an opinion on what they think of the budget. There was no right off the bat type of objections, so they haven't deliberated yet, though. And also any warrant articles that we might need for the annual town meeting. And to that end, tomorrow night there's a meeting of Selectmen and FinComs and the school committee to go over the school committee budget. So that's one that had a big jump year to year, so could be one of those topics. I had the pleasure of being invited to a meeting with Joe and Representative Hill and Representative National Grid. They're going to be here later to present about that. So we got more info than we'd ever seen before, which is wonderful, and we'll see what some of that is. I've been facilitating collecting some citizen input about the use of Shabaka Woods trails, particularly related to 133 Essex Street and the potential sale of that property and access to those. So I've been, the important thing is provide info about use going back more than 20 years, and I'm the conduit to help collect some of that stuff. So we've got a lot of people who have provided it, and I've got a lot of that input, so that's great. And then two kind of announcements, transition ones, but they were in the news, so it's probably nothing new, but Peter Lombardi's moving on from Wenham Town Administrator to Brewster Town Administrator. Peter's been great to work with. Just as a shout out to him personally, professionally, he's really been tremendous, really asset, I think, to the selectmen in Wenham, and a pleasure for our town to work with him, so he's going to be missed. And then another is potentially, it's nothing definite, is Mike Harvey, who is being interviewed, one of the finalists for the superintendent of Masco. I did get a call from their school committee about references, so I think they're doing final interviews, public interviews on Thursday, so that might be happening too. So two senior administrators that we have an awful lot to do. Our town does over 70% of our spending is shared between the school district and Wenham, so it's, those are impactful kind of changes for us. So those are my updates.
All right, thank you. Mr. Olson. I like how you looked around and see if
nobody else. Planning board's here tonight, so we'll hear from them about what we're working on. Affordable Housing Trust, I did miss the meeting last week, but we had an interesting discussion because there's a property in Asbury Street that's offered to sell to the Affordable Housing Trust to maybe build some houses there. So they think they've done an early survey, might be able to build 10 units back there. So we're going to look at that and see if it's a worthwhile opportunity to create some affordable housing and a property that probably won't have much else done to it. So it might be a good opportunity. So we'll look at that. We also are still looking at the town meeting for that warrant article to change the structure of the Affordable Housing Trust to having 5 residents and a quorum of only 3. So working on that. The library is searching for a new director. So the search committee starts on Wednesday. We have a meeting, I think, on this Wednesday to start the search committee for the new director, as the other one is retiring, moving on. And we have a 186 Meyer Road update that we did issue a letter to them from the building inspector, putting a fine for a violation of our new bylaw for unsafe, hazardous, sort of houses. So that went out, I think, in the last week, $100 a day until they meet the conditions of the violation. They also have hired a contractor. I got their license. I checked it out. Their license is a valid license. They've also issued a schedule. I've only seen the schedule just the last couple of days, but we were hoping they'd be done in July with the 186 Meyer Road, and right now they're saying completion at the end of November. So I'm going to look and see if I can help shorten this thing up, because we thought 6 months was an appropriate duration, but now it's turned into about 10 months. Yeah. So we'll look at this and see if we can get that right now. But the violations are, being accrued. So we'll see how that motivates them.
All right. For myself, very briefly, there's a MMA, a Mass Municipal Association meeting on the 28th in Boston at 11 a.m. I can't make it, but if anybody here wishes to go, they're discussing recycling in the state. It's going to be a fairly important meeting, I think. They're going to kind of brainstorm and talk to, I think Casella's going to be there, a few other haulers, vendors, and they're going to address the recycling kind of issues. I've heard through some venues that some towns are now no longer recycling. They're just putting it right in the trash and paying the tipping fee for the landfill. So they're going to try and address that and see what kind of solution we can come up with now that the market's dropped out of China and it doesn't look like it's going to be coming back. So people are getting together and talking about that. Also, just a reminder, tomorrow night there is a joint Wenham Board of Selectmen, FinCom, and Hamilton Board of Selectmen and FinCom meeting with the school committee at Bucher School discussing the regional school budget. So we'll be there tomorrow night. Tune in if you're interested. And that's really all I have, except for one last thing. Allison Jenkins isn't here tonight, but I wanted to wish my condolences to her and the McGurl family for the loss of her father. So we just want to send some best wishes to the family. Joe.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. My entire report will be online, although I just noticed that there's an error that I'll have to fix beforehand. First item is, in an effort to better communicate with residents and taxpayers, we are working on an e-newsletter that will get mailed out. We'll be asking people to sign up for it. This is a mock-up of what it will look like. There's copies in all of the Selectmen packets, but this would get pushed out to people who sign up for the service. You get an email in your inbox, and these little buttons are all live, so it coordinates with the town website. Different news and announcements, calendar announcements that we put on there would get pulled into this e-newsletter once a week. Kind of the highlights of the town website over the last week. People would get it in their inbox. They could click on the links for the things that they wanted to read more about and ignore the ones that they don't want to read more about. So that's a proactive way to try to let people know what's going on and help them interface with our website a little bit. I'm going to skip the next item because Ann Giroux is here to ably discuss it in a little while. We also want to let you know, and I say here in my report that it's tomorrow morning, but it's actually a week from tomorrow morning. The town staff is going to begin working with MAPC on our hazard mitigation plan. So that's getting off the ground finally. We signed a contract in December, and they'll be getting to work on updating our lapsed hazard mitigation plan. The town also received word a week or so ago that the company that provides our email service is going out of business at the end of March. So it was good that Allison and I were already looking to try and move us from this mail server anyway. We're going to be, we had a conference call with a company that's on the state bid list to provide this service, and they're supposed to provide us a quote this week. I want to thank Allison. Allison used her knowledge of the state procurement system to identify the two companies that we could work with without having to go out to bid. And given that we don't have a lot of time to make the transition, that was very helpful. We have, we're looking right now at Office 365 as the new server I've worked with in the past. It's an excellent system, and it interacts very well with folks' smartphones and things. So it'll really bring us into the current century, which is nice. Update that the town union negotiations, all three of the collective bargaining agreements that are up, all three of those unions have reached out to me to initiate discussions on them. Negotiations, I should say, not discussions. I have 2 bargaining sessions lined up already with the admin union, and I have meet and greets with the union leadership for the police and fire unions later this week. Biggest thing on the town manager goals to update you on, well, actually there's a couple of them. We hired a director for the Patton Homestead. Kaylee Perret is a young woman who's been working with a couple of area museums on a part-time basis. She comes well recommended, full of energy, a lot of experience in using new media to try to drive visitorship and increase participation at the places that she's worked with, and she has built-in relationships with the Wenham Museum, already having previously interned and worked with them in the past. So all those things were the things that kind of pushed her over the top. We had a number of good, solid applicants, and it came down. It was a very, very tough decision, but I think that Kaylee's energy and enthusiasm for the job will make her a good fit for the rest of the team here at Town Hall. Also, we're having a meeting tomorrow morning, a phone call tomorrow morning with an engineer looking at the Chabaco Road and well exploration issue. Woodard and Curran is a company I've worked with in the past. They're very professional. They do a great job of keeping very close to a good budget. They're very low percentage of total project costs and their fees when I've worked with them in the past. And they are currently the ones managing the Manchester water plant, so they have familiarity with that site already. So they're looking at the plans that were developed 5 or 6 years ago for the town, going to try to get us an updated cost estimate on those plans and what the work would take. And they'll be able to recommend to us whether it's worth considering or worth continuing to investigate the Manchester well as an option for our water sustainability in the future. So, town hall renovations, the town hall building committee, you guys noted there's a couple of openings and you're looking for more members, but they had a second meeting last week with the architects who brought a couple new proposals forward, and with the recommendations that this board made on your vote about the use of the second floor, they've kind of got, I think they're down to 2 choices that they really like, and they've been asked to go back and make some minor tweaks and bring them back again. So hopefully, you know, that's moving forward. I'll let the planning board update us on the master plan and housing stuff because they know more than I.
All right, thank you, Joe. All right, now on to our planning board representatives report. We have a handful of things on the agenda to discuss and kind of go over. I'll turn it over to Brian and Rick now to kind of give us an intro on what they're going to tell us about tonight, and then we can grill them with some questions.
So Rick's going to update us on the master plan and upcoming forum tomorrow night. I know that's what Joe just ended with, so I figure that's a good place to start. So Rick, if you want to.
Oh, okay.
That'd be good.
I want to start sort of with what we've been doing to try and drive participation. Excuse me. We've done a lot of outreach, so I'll just go through the list here. It's not in any particular order. An email was sent out by the school department to all Hamilton parents on the survey with the link and also with information on the dates of the 2 meetings, which I'll discuss in a minute. It's on the town website, town Facebook page, went out via Twitter. It's on the Hamilton Wenham Residents Only Facebook page, been posted multiple times. It's on the Hamilton Affordable Housing Advocates Facebook page. Jay Burnham has been posting it on his weekly emails that go out, and it's been posted at the Senior Center. We had an article last week in the Chronicle, an article in the Hamilton Wenham Patch, and our consultant was at the railroad station about 10 days ago for the first 2 commuter trains passing out cards to early commuters. Then notification has been sent to town boards and committees. So as of about 3 o'clock today, we've had 501 survey responses, which is good. That's about I'm estimating about 20% of the households in town, so that's a pretty good response that we're going to be happy with, and I'll be very interested to see what kinds of responses we get, because the way it's being done, it can be broken down by income, by age, so we can really slice and dice the data to get some in-depth information. Meeting dates, well, our first meeting is tomorrow night at the Hamilton Wenham Public Library from 7 to 9 p.m. The public is invited. It's going to be people grouped at tables for some interactive discussion about what they like about the town, what they would like to see changed in town, what they don't like about the town, what they don't want to see changed. We're really just trying to generate people's thoughts and ideas about where they want to see housing and other related items go in town. A second one will be held Wednesday, March 20th at 7 to 9 p.m. at the middle and high school cafeteria, which will be summarizing really the results of the survey, also the focus groups. We had 8 focus groups of 5 people each, for a total of 40 that attended. I think there were about 1-hour meetings, and really prompted, again, some discussion about what people on those focus groups wanted to see, liked about the town, didn't like about the town, wanted to preserve about the town. So that's where we are now, and we hope by end of, I think it's April, to be wrapped up with the housing portion of the update of the master plan. So we're anticipating that recommendations will come out of that. Then we will be having, the planning board's got to identify what it wants to take up in terms of priorities for potential new zoning bylaws or amendments to zoning bylaws. So we're anticipating it would be at the earliest 2020 Springtown meeting that we might bring new housing bylaws to the voters to vote on. So that's where we are.
When does the survey close? I don't remember you saying that.
Say again?
When does the survey close?
It's really, I think we said mid-February.
Yeah.
Mid-February.
I don't have an exact date.
So people, if they're listening tonight and have not participated, and we know there's certainly a lot that haven't, you can go to the town website. There's a link, and there's also more information on the upcoming meetings. Did I miss anything?
Good.
Okay, that's it.
That's it.
Unless I can answer any questions.
Is there going to be any sort of update at our town meeting coming up?
We certainly can do that. We'll probably be at a 90% completion by that time, so we certainly can do a 5-minute update on where we are.
Yeah, there's already been a good amount of data that came out of the focus groups that they'll talk a little bit about tomorrow night in front of the public that's there, and like Rick said, have some general discussions in groups. But yeah, we'll be able to at least have all that information from these meetings and from the focus groups to present at town meeting if we don't have the final report by then.
Yeah, I think there were 2, and they've also will be updating. They're looking at the demographics of the town in terms of the population, its ages and incomes, and housing, and kind of 2 factoids that came out of it on a very preliminary basis that was very interesting, at least to me, was the median income for a family of 4 in Hamilton is $114,000. But that same family with an income of $114,000 cannot afford the home in Hamilton that's selling at the median price of about $540,000. They would need an additional income of about $40,000 a year to be able to afford that. I thought that was pretty telling about the lack of housing that fairly high income compared to most people. Our teachers, our firefighters, our policemen aren't making that kind of income. Certainly anybody that works in town hall, other than a few, maybe the town manager could afford that, but it's pretty.
My wife.
It's pretty telling in terms of the lack of financial, and we're calling this financially accessible housing rather than affordable, because that's one of the other things is that people get so confused about what is affordable. And we'll get into that. And we hope through this whole process to lay down some basic information so people understand where we are as a town, what are the demographics of the town. The other fact that came out is that 30% of our homeowners in town are housing cost burdened, which means they're spending more than 30% of their income on supporting a house, just maintaining the house, and that's the rough measure that's used by banks and HUD and other state agencies for measuring whether a family is cost burdened. So not only do we have expensive housing, but it's hard for at least 1/3 of our population to maintain that housing. So it's pretty telling, and I think people don't quite understand that. So we hope through this process that and other kinds of information will come out.
Oh, very interesting, for sure. Anybody have any questions on master plan so far?
Thank you.
Yeah.
For reaching out as much as you have. Appreciate that, where you're going.
Right up to the microphone.
And anything tailored to the seniors in terms of outreach? Might be going on with that?
Well, it was posted at the Senior Center, and Mary Beth knows about it, and hopefully she has been internally promoting that. We don't really have a vehicle to get to the seniors. I mean, it's sort of, we hope that many seniors are online or are able to get online or read the Chronicle or are on Jay Burnham's list. But we haven't specifically targeted seniors in any other fashion.
Yeah, when I did the survey a couple of years ago, 2016 now, I think, I printed out hard copies of it and took them down to the senior center. You might think about doing that, and then collected them from there.
No,
I had quite a few people filling them out at the senior
good.
center, so
All
Mary
right.
Beth can help you with that. It was actually pretty helpful. I think I had close to maybe 75 or so people
Wow.
that did them.
Oh, okay. We can
So,
do that.
Quite a
Definitely.
few people, if they don't have access to online stuff, they'll do it in hard copy, so
Yeah.
food for thought.
Just if I may, just an aside, Joe, I think that's great that the webpage, you're going to be doing a rework of that, and people can sign up for it. This is an aside, and I'm just speaking as a sort of voter, participant in town government. It's so hard to reach people, and I'm just wondering if it would make sense to incur the expense, which I guess is around $1,000, to send a postcard to every household in town and said, this is now available, you can sign up for this, so that at least that information is out there, that they can connect, because we all are struggling to try and connect with people and inform them and provide information. And, you know, it's when we bring this up at town meeting or other forums, people go, I didn't know anything about that.
We get to do inserts in water bills every once in a while, too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that kind of,
Yeah, someone raised,
Sort of
I
thing.
got an email from someone within the last couple months talking about the same kind of an outreach thing. And their suggestion, which wasn't a bad one, but I don't know if we could do it, was in our census that our town clerk sends out every year, ask for an email address in that, and then we could use that
Yeah.
for stuff as well. So food for thought. Jeff, anything from you? Questions?
No, thank you.
Comments from the audience?
I just wondered if
You just have to, I'm sorry, they have to bother you, you gotta come up, you gotta come up to the microphone, I'm sorry.
I'm
Just so the
thinking
folks
of
at
two
home.
things right now. Do you know that the Council on Aging puts out 2 papers a month
Yep.
to every senior citizen?
The newsletter.
I get
Okay,
it. I get
You must
it.
get one, yes.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was, when you talk about an income, a medium income of 114, is that mean mode or what are you using for a medium?
That's median.
It's median with an N? Okay.
Yeah.
Because it certainly can be somewhat different with things. Do you know that an awful lot of senior citizens have incomes of about 30,000?
Oh, I'm very well aware of it. And, that's part of the discussion is you know, there's not a lot of housing available for seniors that would like to downsize. And
Right.
there's not a lot of housing for young couples that would like to move to Hamilton to start a family.
Status.
Right. So And all we're building now, or all the planning board is seeing now, are houses, and we're approving plans for houses that are in the $900 to $1.2 million range. You know, and certainly that's not going to fill the holes that we're seeing.
All right. Next thing, thank you. Just want to go down the list with them then?
Yeah.
So first one we'll talk about is the draft road acceptance policy, review and implications for the town and the planning board. And Patrick's drafted up something that should be in your packets. Currently, we have a policy that the town will split the bill with the homeowners, if I'm speaking correctly here, Patrick. For example, if a neighborhood wants their road accepted and they petition it, and let's say the engineering cost and everything all in is $1 million, the town would be responsible for $500,000 of that. So we are rewriting the policy and the bylaw to reflect best practice from majority of other towns, I would say, in the state, in that the homeowners are responsible for the update of that road so that it meets the town standards, and then once it's done to the standards, we'll take a look at it and go through a process so that the road will be accepted, and then we make it a town road, basically. Is that nail on the head for the most part? That's basically, that's a higher level view of it. Patrick's done a good job of this. He's taken some of it from, was it Canton? Pretty robust policy. I looked it over today just briefly. It looked good to me, better than what we had previously. Any comments from you two? Have you had a chance to look it over and discuss it at your meetings at all?
We haven't had a public meeting on it, no. We have previously to that policy that you found. We had talked about it a couple of times at least. We, at one point we had initially had just gotten rid of the policy. And then I think it was comments from your board that maybe we do have a policy, but then it just puts all the costs back on the homeowners. So there is at least an option for it. Mm-hmm. So that's when Patrick then went back to the drawing board and redid that policy. So.
And I think it leads into, you've got a couple other items a little bit farther down the line, the discussion with the planning board on the policy of plowing and waste removal for new developments. And this kind of, I think, all is similarly based in cost of the town and manpower, et cetera. To use the Patton Ridge, for example, those homeowners have come to us and asked us to do their waste pickup. And we had other roads that aren't town roads ask us to do plowing, and we have done plowing on many of those roads in the past. And so our policy has been a little bit neither here nor there with some different neighborhoods. It depends on who gets together and whatnot for the road accepted policy and the plowing. We're trying to kind of make it all even across the board, so we're not pitting neighborhoods against each other or not making it fair to everyone. And I know with the Patton Ridge, in that agreement, in the conditions was that their HOA was responsible for the plowing and the trash removal, but there was one line in there, and Allison pointed it out to us a few meetings ago, was that that was the case unless the Board of Selectmen felt differently. So it was kind of an out for them to come to petition us.
Right.
And so we wanted to make sure we were on the same page as the planning board, and then say it's kind of all or nothing. Don't make us supersede what you've asked the developer to do or the homeowners to do. So we just want to make sure we're on the same page, and that we're either giving everybody plowing and waste removal, or we're giving nobody plowing and waste removal. So.
Right.
Yeah. No, it was certainly the intent. And is the intent with Canterbrook as well, 23 units that are now under construction or will be shortly, is that the homeowners are responsible for their operations of waste disposal, plowing, and anything else that goes on the property. They bought that property knowing that. It was in the deed. It's in the conditions. I don't think there's any belief on the planning board that it should be anything else. So from my point of view is it's black and white. They're responsible, they bought the property, they knew what they were buying, so
Right.
they
I think
own.
with the case of future Canterbrook residents and the current Patton Ridge residents,
Yes,
they're the first owners of these houses, so they're aware of that.
yes. Oh,
And I
yeah.
think, so we've had some neighborhoods where people come to us that are second or third owners down the line, and they don't know what was in the original conditions. So then we have to go back and look and see if there's deed restriction on it and stuff like that. But I think the policy should be moving forward, like you said, it should be on the developer, on the homeowner.
And that's, I mean, not that we've approved that many in the past 7, 8, 9 years that I've been on the board. There's been a few, but every one of them has been, privately owned road, has not been a town road.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why we took that position of there should be no, we said no policy because the town is not going to pick up the burden. And I think Joe and others correctly said, well, you really need to state that in writing what the policy is. And I think this is very well done. I liked it because it's very clear, it's well written, and then it provides the documents that the homeowners association or the homeowners need to actually submit documentation. So it's not unfriendly. It says, here's what you have to do, here are the forms you need to submit, and if you want to, you can make that happen and bear the cost for doing it.
Right. And with Patton Ridge and Canterbrook, and then thinking back to my time basically on a planning board with road width and acceptable roads, are both of those roads going to those last two developments that I'm talking about up to town acceptance? Are they the 22, 20, whatever feet?
24.
24 feet?
24.
That's pretty much, I mean, the road, the bylaw says 32, which is kind of ridiculous for roads around here, or for a small subdivision road. But the fire department is really the one that controls, they want to,
trucks by each other.
They want to see
turn
24
around and-
in most cases, yep.
Right. We try and minimize it to the greatest extent possible, but we rarely defer to the police and fire departments telling us what they see as need to ensure public safety and their own safety on getting equipment in and out. So they drive that decision pretty
You
much.
want to weigh the permeable pavement versus, safety.
Right, I
but-
know that was one of your
yeah.
big things.
Yeah, it was like you're
Patton
paving a-
Ridge it was another football field into a
Football paving,
blacktop.
right? Well, you could have just widened the road halfway through to create a passing lane, and then, but
Right.
you don't want to err on the side of safety. And I was on the planning board during the Patton Ridge. I don't remember why we put that line in there about, and I think moving forward, I think the thing is we get rid of that.
Yeah.
It must have been a
Absolutely.
carryover from a previous
Right.
language, because it was never part of a discussion we had that we were going to let the selectmen overrule the
deed
plowing and
the deeds,
yeah.
basically.
But there is a contradicting bylaw though, because we do allow neighborhoods to come to us to plow if they meet certain, to pay,
There's
to
more
plow.
than 4 houses on
Yeah.
a street.
So I don't know, so that conflicts because we don't say in the agreement that they can't use that in the future. So 4 years down the road, then they go, hey, well, here, we now want to use this bylaw. There's more than 4 houses. We meet all the conditions. Now you have to plow us. So
Right.
how do we? So I think we need to make that work as well.
Maybe we should,
I get-
the select board should create a policy. It's kind of reinforces what the planning board, their elected board too, they've already decided, so that carve out of what they've done in the development agreement with the owners is reinforced, so they're not going back 20 years later, like
Right.
Tim does now. It's like, oh, well, if we could do more, we would, and we'd like to, and, it's maybe better if we had more of an affirmative policy to make it clear that we're supporting all the public hearings and the design reviews, everything else that the planning board goes through.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah,
a
and
good
those
idea.
conditions are on the plan that are registered at the Registry of Deeds. So there should be no, understood, 20
Be no
years,
gray
20
area.
20 years from now, somebody can come in and say, well, here's what I want to do, and unless you do the research, basically the burden is on the petitioner. They have to come in and demonstrate that they've done their homework and that they have a valid case for whatever is they're looking for. So there is real documentation. It's there. in various locations. So that policy should include reference to those kinds of documents so that whomever is filling these positions on the planning board or the board of selectmen in the future can say, well, have you, is this registered with the registry of deeds? Was this a condition on the documents? And it's your responsibility to prove it otherwise.
Right, kind of a checklist for people. Ann, you have a comment?
Hi, my name is Ann Giroux, and I'm on the Waste Reduction Committee. And at some point, Patton Ridge representatives came and spoke to us about this issue. And I agree with you, Rick, that they should have been very well aware. I think it's in the special permit. It's pretty clear that they took on that obligation. One of the points they were making to us, though, is it's very expensive for them to hire Hilts to come and do pick up the waste and then also the recycling and the composting. So what they're doing right now is they're only paying for waste removal. So at Patton Ridge, they're not doing recycling or composting. And they are actually, they said it would be fine if they could actually pay the town the cost of them joining in on the Casella contract, because it would enable them to compost and recycle, and it would be cheaper than if they had to pay Hilts to pick up those 3 items, because Hilts would have to add a whole nother truck is the issue. Hilts is not currently doing compost or recycling in the town. I believe it's just doing waste pickup. So I just wanted to point that issue out.
The cost difference, we've been back and forth with them a little bit, and I think their cost was $8,000 or $10,000 a year for Hilts to come and do their tipping. And if we added them into our route, it'd be about $2,000 or less, $1,700 to $2,000, I think. We not fully baked in number, but that's kind of what ballpark we thought was. They actually made an offer to pay the difference, or pay the $1,700. We haven't fully talked more about it, but we want to get on board with the planning board about it as far as the waste and not waste and plowing and stuff like that before we talk further about it. But
so just as long as that doesn't open the door, this isn't Pandora's box where they say, well, now you're doing garbage, what about plowing?
Right,
so,
right. And that's
in other developments, well, why don't we pay a little
yeah.
extra?
And that's the whole thing, right?
So
it's a slippery slope, right? So
yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I mean, I think it's great that they, want to recycle. Maybe that's something we can address within the any future documents, is that they are required to recycle at their own cost.
maybe.
Hey, we eliminated plastic bags. We require people to buy blue bags if they've got excess. So I guess you can call me a conservative on this. I don't think the town should be picking up unanticipated costs unless there's a really good and sound financial reason to do it.
Right. Right. And I think, and also with, let's say, for instance, if we agreed to pick up the Patton Ridge's trash, and then Canterbrook says, hey, we'll pay that added fee to the town as well, and then you get a snowball effect, and then we're all over the place trying to figure it out for different developments.
Right, right. And every time you renegotiate the contract, you're going to have to go back to the homeowners who may not be the same homeowners and going, whoa, where did this come from?
Right. Right.
So I'm very much sensitive to the recycling.
No, I actually agree with you, Rick.
I'm just speaking personally. So I'd like to draw clean lines.
Yeah, I agree.
And to the degree that they have to figure out to pay somebody to come in and recycle, so be it.
Do you have any other comments on the plowed or unplowed, Patrick? No. Okay. Any other discussion on those couple of items?
The only question I have on that is that if Patton Ridge comes to us with that bylaw, how does one supersede the other? Then more than 4 houses, so I know they don't.
For the plowing.
Yeah. We don't say specifically in the that it waives the the other bylaw in town.
I think we probably get in a little bit of a, I'm not going to impute a legal kerfuffle because the planning board's been through all this,
But I'm saying that
and the
moving
developer
forward-
accepted the conditions of what they did.
Sorry, my point is not for that. My point is moving forward, we need to make, so I want to talk about, because moving forward, we need to be very clear that we do
Right.
new developments, that we very clearly waive that, so we don't have,
Right.
we
I
don't
think
have a
the first thing
confusion.
would be to take the,
Yeah.
or by petition of the select board
Out.
yeah.
out.
Well, then why don't you just get rid of that other bylaw that says?
Well, that's what I want to get rid of the other bylaw, too. But,
That seems like the easiest way.
well, because we currently plow, what, 9th Street or something like that?
11, I think.
I think it's 11, yeah.
11, yeah.
So,
We're kind of stuck in the middle, and so
So it sounds like-
we want to reset, make it clear and concise, and not take too much burden on for what developers
What do you-
agreed to do when they, you know.
It's tricky. I mean, do you grandfather in the ones you're already plowing and then move forward from there? I mean, that's, that opens up a can of worms, but probably the fairest way to do it.
So, a question for Joe. I believe it's public interest sometimes to do some things for everybody, like trash, recycling, things like that, can be good, and if we can help our neighbors sometimes reduce their costs, but if we're absorbing more cost, then that's not appropriate, especially if they bought or the developer took on the condition of accepting this anyway. So if we're renegotiating this thing in a way, there's your time, let's assume we could do it, we'd need a deal, an agreement, we need to have accounting every year, like look at, what's the current cost, how much does it cost everybody, figure out some way to peanut butter that across. There's a lot of overhead associated with that. So if we were to do it, I'm trying to add more work to, because it's already agreed to not do it, but if there was a path to go forward where people paid the actual cost and a 25% uplift or some, I don't know, a number that covers all these other things, maybe that helps. Maybe it helps.
Right, now I know what you're saying.
I don't know, well, Brad and Ridge specifically, I mean, that was a piece of town-owned property. It was sold to the town as having very low burden to the tax rate on the town. So I'd have a real hard time going back and, changing what was sold to the town residents on kind of the permission to sell that and develop it into condominiums.
Right. I think part of Scott's point, though, is if we could figure out a matrix
Make money on
to
it.
cover that,
Make money on it.
to cover that,
Idea.
and then add a little user fee to it to split the difference kind of thing. If
Well, it wouldn't
you
just
know,
be for them, it'd
be
be,
for everybody. Right.
It's a lot of work.
yeah.
Got to figure it out.
Cover that out, recover that.
we'd have to figure out a per house
Right.
cost.
Right. Yeah, you'd have to level the whole thing.
Right.
And then you'd actually have to amend their deeds and their management contracts. I mean, because they actually, there's a contract that this homeowners association specifies specifically what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. So while I appreciate what you're trying to do, Scott, you're opening, it becomes very complicated. And what happens is legacy, as you and I and everybody moves on, unless it's really well documented and really well administered, and there's the people and the systems in place.
Well, that's where the role of policy, no matter how the select board might adjudicate this, and it's not in contrast with what you're trying to get
Yeah.
tries to make that endure. By having a policy, we then say the town government will then also create procedures that are going to follow that on a consistent basis, so that it's not the 20 years from now, the next riled up group. I'm not saying Canterbrook is going to be all riled up, but maybe Canterbrook shows up, then they go, the world has changed again, and we don't like that original deal.
Right.
So I'm more a fan of having enduring policies that we implement that try our best to cover it, instead of leaving some gaps and then it's deal by deal. You guys don't deal like deal by deal. I'm not trying to say you're making it hard for anybody, but I think that's our job, is to make it easy for everybody.
Can I just ask sort of a question here, and maybe I'm mixing apples, oranges, and bananas. With the road acceptance policy, I'm wondering if you can, if they, let's say Patton Ridge wanted to go through that and said, we want the town to accept this.
That trash is included in the road acceptance policy.
Exactly.
Yeah, it would have to be.
I would think that once you accept it as a public road,
Yeah.
it's all going to be
Yeah, it's all gonna be
included.
Right.
And, you know, Tim Olson pointed out to me this morning and wanted me to remind you all, as we consider the road acceptance policy and move it along through the process here, that should also include utility work in the ground. So we should be making sure that whatever water main or our stormwater runoff system was put in the ground before the road gets paved is brought up to whatever spec we will require.
Well, maybe as an example, and I know we got other topics to go through, is like we look, this is our just first reading of the road acceptance policy later. We weave the trash and or plowing into that policy.
Right.
Like if you want that, you got to go down the whole
Right.
route of it's
I
a
agree,
town
yeah.
public way.
I think so.
Because once you accept it as a public way, you're not
gonna
gonna be able to say, oh, well, you know, it's a private way, we don't have, you're gonna have to treat them the same as all other
Right, it's gonna be a
residents on
town
a
road,
public way.
right.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the newer private ways were built to a pretty good standard, right? It's just the old ones that we've
Right.
seen
Right.
that weren't.
Right.
I mean, you know, you drive up and down Patton Ridge, and you know you could probably do some things there. You drive through the junction, and that's really just a driveway. It's a glorified driveway, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to do the same thing there that you could
Right.
do down the road at Patton Ridge. So, you know, those things would have to be considered.
Yep. There's a lot of things that weave into that, the condition of the roads and a lot of stuff that starts getting complicated
Pretty much
after a long
all
period
that
of time.
infrastructure, and you know, this policy that you're going to read later on as
Yeah.
the first reading it goes a good long way towards that on the surface side, but anything subsurface should probably be addressed, and anything to do with you know, accompanying services should probably be addressed on that too.
Yeah.
So the town knows what we're getting into when we do it.
All right, so looks like we've got a lot of food for thought in maybe making our acceptance policy a little more robust with including the trash and the plowing, et cetera.
Just a follow-up question. So, Joe, or will Selectmen be making comments on the draft to incorporate what you've just stated and then send it back to us? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, it's a discrete agenda item for us later, so I imagine we'll talk about it then, but it
Okay.
sounds like if that's a reasonable way to go forward, that's why we have them. There's a first reading, and then we look at modifying, and then we go through another time with potential acceptance, so
Okay.
that would be the time for us to debate it.
I just want to
A
know.
lot of times, by the time we get this point, it might only be one meeting between, but this one might require, you know, a couple meetings to give you guys a chance to meet and comment, and, you know, give Patrick a chance to help us reword some parts.
All right, next one we have accelerating review of tree removal to assist with improving National Grid electrical service. So Tim Olson, our DPW director, came in and was talking a little bit about the tree removal and the hearings and stuff like that, and was wondering if there's any way to accelerate the review.
Yeah, it's mainly scenic roads that we have purview.
So you got to have a public hearing on those, right? Is that the rule?
It's not all trees, it's just on scenic
on the
roads. It's
scenic
on
roads.
scenic roads.
That's right, that's exactly it. And the meeting that Joe and I and Representative Hill is here, as well as the National Grid people are now too. That was one of the things that Tim brought up, our DPW director, is like, if there was some expeditious way to work with the planning board on the scenic roads when there's tree removal needs to happen, because just like they have issues of tree clearing to help sustain the electrical service, then the areas we control, if we can do anything we can to move as quickly as possible too. That's really the essence of the request.
Well, right, and Claire, help me, because I'm I'm watching actually a Splundy doing, you know, right now. Do they have a by right ability to trim the trees from the utility poles? I mean, they don't have to.
A certain amount. We'll hear more about the tree trimming later. It's a big part of what's caused outages, but
Right.
certain amount.
I'm just
Kind of a
wondering.
mixed bag, Rick. Some of it's in their easement right away. Others, they have to ask the homeowner if it's
Oh,
okay,
okay.
depending how far it is.
Yeah.
I think they ask the homeowner regardless, whether they have to or not, they do ask the homeowner.
I'm just wondering, what I'm thinking out loud here is if they have a certain right of way that they don't have to notify and can cut, I'm wondering if we can incorporate that into the scenic roadways bylaw that basically says the utility can, based on its right-of-way or whatever the legal terminology, can trim the trees. So you don't have to go through the board.
I think this is in our DPW director's role as a tree warden to remove trees expeditiously.
Oh, okay, okay,
Not
Right,
so
it's
much
not- it's
the
not so much
trimming of the
maintenance, right,
trees.
it's removal.
okay.
Yeah, trimming's not a problem, it's cutting it down.
So that's really the essence of it. If he comes forward, I think it's an ass on behalf of the town.
I think it's more removal than trim.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we've run across this before. If a tree's dead, it shouldn't have to come to us to be taken
Right.
down.
Right.
Right? But if it's,
And so we could say something like, if it's dead, diseased, or dying based on the opinion of a certified arborist, then the DPW director has the right to remove it without a hearing.
That would be great.
And then that would make it easy for us to just have, arborist on retainer that can come out, make an assessment, give us a written report, and the tree can be gone.
Right. I mean, otherwise, because really what we're worried about is somebody arbitrarily taking a really nice tree
Right.
and removing it because they don't like it.
Right.
Or block something that they want to look
Right.
at. Or
So
whatever. Yeah.
that's an amendment I think we could do within that bylaw.
Yeah.
And it should be.
I don't think the DPW director has an oar in the water about the looks. It's all about
It's all about safety.
maintaining the
Oh, no,
clearance and safety.
Oh, believe me, you see trees along the main road that are dead, and you're going, that's going to come down on somebody's car in the next snowstorm, and you're going, somebody needs to get rid of that thing.
So, yeah, that would be great if you guys could do something for that. He would like that a lot. All right. Annual town meeting, zoning bylaw, public hearings, items, and timing. How are you guys with what you're bringing to town meeting and timing for public hearings and rewrites and edits and all that fun stuff?
we've got a number of things we're looking to bring to town meeting. One is a modification to the inclusionary housing bylaw.
Right, I pause for 1 second there. I had a accessory housing bylaw, and I meant
You meant inclusionary?
inclusionary. I
Yeah,
apologize
because
on the agenda.
we've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all been done.
Yep.
Been vetted and voted.
So we need to make an amendment to this in two parts. One is based on Canterbrook. We need to remove the senior affordable requirement as part of the senior housing projects because the state no longer allows you to restrict senior affordable units to just seniors. Fair housing, you have to accommodate everyone.
Everybody.
So it kind of goes against our senior housing bylaw and the 55 and over or whatever and over senior housing projects that, have affordable units in them. You can't restrict it to no one 18 under can live there. You can't do that anymore with affordable housing units. And the other part of this is amending the payment in lieu of formula.
Right.
Right now, it's, payment in lieu for one unit is 146.
And it doesn't make up the
Which
cost of
doesn't
us
make up the
doing something
cost.
with it.
Exactly. So we've been looking at how various other towns do it and so forth, and we still have a little bit of work to do on that. But it's still not going to make up the cost no matter what you do. Really, it's just what's fair for a developer, what's not going to scare a developer away completely because your number's too high. I mean, when we were chatting about it at one of our meetings, the $250,000 to $275,000 a unit seemed a little bit more in line with where we are here and not being too egregious that it's going to scare them away. Even though we had this policy in place of $146,000 per unit, we negotiated with Canterbrook developer for the 2 units. They were required there for, was it $437 or $435 for 2 units. So that's,
Almost 225.
225-ish, so. So yeah, that 250-ish range seems appropriate.
And it would be indexed to inflation,
Yes.
so
That would be good.
it stays.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be.
Stays
That would be
flexible.
Since the inclusionary housing payments would wind up going to the Affordable Housing Trust, have you looked at indexing that towards something along the lines of what it would cost the Affordable Housing Trust to create units? In other
Well,
words,
You know,
Yes.
because that gets more involved in the financing side. If the Affordable Housing Trust can use its funds to drive down the cost of financing for the project developer, then they can make something happen with less than what would be the
Right.
cost of a unit, right?
Right,
So-
it's just what kind of unit are they developing,
Right.
right? So if it's a couple units up on Asbury, like they helped Habitat with, versus,
Right.
I'll say, a 20-unit development somewhere, the cost is so different
Right.
for units that it's kind of tough to
do that.
To do
Okay.
that,
I
but,
understand.
so yeah, it's more the, what's kind of fair for everybody. But we still have a little bit of work to do on that.
Will that be ready for town meeting?
That's the plan. Yep. Awesome. That's the plan.
Good plan.
The other one that we're addressing right now is the wireless bylaw, our cell tower bylaw, to address
data.
these new micro cell units that we've seen now recently. Company Mobility came to us recently wanting to put a 40-foot high pole downtown on 1A to put a microcell facility on. It's basically the new 5G. Essentially, it's just data only, and we're trying to work in definitions and language that into our existing cell tower bylaw to address these types of units that will make them go through basically the same process they have to go through for a cell tower, for the most part. But again, it's just getting the terminology into our bylaw. And we have a cell tower expert on the planning board now. So he's been working with Patrick on getting the language into the bylaw and getting definitions taken care of and so forth. So that will be ready for.
That one seems
Town meeting.
fairly straightforward. I
Yes.
read the draft of it, and you're just kind of inserting another
Definition.
type
Of,
type
yes,
of
exactly.
Definitions.
cell phone
Definitions.
definitions in the glossary and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So.
Yep, exactly.
The public information, at least that I've read so far about 5G rollout, which is really not started, so it could be anywhere between 10 and 100 times the number of poles or towers compared to 4G.
Yep.
I understand your process saying, let's look at it like cell towers, so your control and regulation of that. Some of the federal review of it I've seen also is like, you have to be careful about fees and costs locally, because that can be imputed as a way to restrict it, because there's now so many more of these things that are happening all the time. And the last thing I like to see is our town miss the next wave of communication technology, like we're restricted with the current wave. So is there a way in your bylaws, even if it took a little time, to say, oh, how do we handle the numbers? It isn't just the one that we,
Oh, yeah.
it's the unit itself. It's like, if all these things need power and cables, or what's that doing to our viewscapes and, you know, places along the right of way? That's the thing that all of a sudden I think that would be new news to me.
Yeah, well, the problem is that you've got different companies, Mobility, for instance, that has an agreement with MassDOT to be able to put these poles, I'll call them, they're not really towers, poles in the right of way, or potentially on existing power poles, provided that the power pole is sufficient to handle the equipment, right? And their argument to us was, you know, a lot of our poles downtown, the way that they were made and the way the power lines are, they can't put the microcell tower right on top of them. And some poles you can. And they're a vertical real estate company, so they want to have their own pole that they're leasing out to Sprint or whoever it is, right? They want to own those poles in the right of way. That's their project, as they called it. And we were looking at other possible ways to get these microcell facilities on existing either power poles or light poles of patent or what have you.
If we have the ability to not add more.
Right.
Right.
And use what we have, that would be ideal.
Exactly. And other providers, you know, Verizon and so forth, I think are doing more of that. But Mobility is, again, they're looking to own these poles and.
Yeah, so I mean, they tell you they've already negotiated, right, with Mass
Yes,
DOT.
yeah.
They've already have their mile markers picked out.
Yep.
They only have one carrier per pole.
That's right.
So that's a problem too, is that It's not like a cell phone, you could put
And it's
three.
only data.
It's only data, and the idea is it's for these smart cars, right? So that's the concept, is that if you can imagine a car driving down the road has to be able to pick up information all the way down. So if they put one pole, you know they're gonna put another one down that road a mile, every mile is gonna have a pole. So we need to figure out a way to manage that, because
Yeah, well, that was part of the requirements was,
what's your master plan, right?
master plan for the town.
Well, I
Right.
think that this, since we've got our state rep in the audience, I think this is an interesting concept that's going to run with a lot of communities that have a state road. I mean, DOT, I'm just speaking for myself, arbitrarily and capriciously decided to grant mobility this right to put these poles in. Well, suddenly every community that has a state road in its path is going to be subject to this. And it's like, well, hello. I mean, this was the same company that was going to put all the poles on the MBTA right away, and it got, you know, that died. So I wonder if that's going to happen again when communities start seeing the DOT is like basically laid out a carte blanche for these kinds of installations all over.
But yeah, they'll also will tell you they're protected by the Federal Telecommunications
no,
Act.
I understood. No, I understood. I get it, believe me. But it's like, hello, when did this happen and how does this impact our town? So anyway, I'm just bringing that up because it's going to start coming up more and more.
So what do you think you have ready for this town meeting on this? You're going to make the small modifications now just by definitions? You're going to add that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and what it's designed to do basically is they have to demonstrate that they've exhausted all other opportunities for siting it someplace else. We said, for example, put it on the light poles at Patton Park. They're there. They have power. There's nothing else. They've got the elevation. So, you know, there's a process of that they're going to have to go through that. You know, we're going to make them jump through a lot of hoops to prove that they absolutely, positively can't put it someplace else. But in the end, you're right. The Federal Telecommunications Act overrules local authorities. Hence, we're going, well, geez, who granted that authority?
Well, it's a delicate balance you're in, because in the late 90s, the town passed a bylaw. Basically, we created a bylaw that made it hard to do any cell towers.
Restricted, right.
So then we shut ourselves out a lot, and it's unsafe in places around our town. Now there's another generation of technology coming. Great. A lot of people like being connected all the time. But if what comes with this, if there's a way for us to jump on the bandwagon so we miss this one, but at the same time not affect, suddenly there's 10 times as many poles in town as what we already have. That's
you can't have your cake and eat it too. So Verizon, no problem. They own the poles. So they can put whatever they want on it. Now they can decide whether they want to use that franchise to sell to their competitors or not. So you're right. I mean, it's like you want to give them the opportunity, but you don't want to give them too much opportunity. So we're like in the Helen Keller method of trying to figure out how to deal with this new technology and how it's impacting the town. And we don't have an answer other than what we have now. And fortunately, Dan Ham is, works on this day to day, and he's advising us, what the best approach is. So don't have clarity there.
Thank you. So more food for thought, I think, more discussions from the planning board. Did I send you the article from the paper about mobility? I sent it to you.
Yeah.
And you, Patrick, right? I don't know if you got it. I'll forward it to you. It's an interesting article in the Honolulu Advertiser about mobility over the summer coming into Honolulu and putting their sites around the city and the city charging them for real estate, basically. Mm-hmm. So, food for thought.
Well, that makes more sense than just getting carte blanche from Mass DOT.
True. I agree.
Right. And that's why I'm saying, well,
revenue stream would be nice.
Right. But I mean, DOT took that right away.
They took it away from us.
Right. We have no right.
Another one was the air B&B bylaw. The governor has enlisted or made some, we can either opt in or opt out of it, to my understanding. Is that correct, Patrick? Right. So have you had any discussions about that? We've talked about it potentially for a couple of years, doing a fee and having people have insurance and all this, but now I think at the state level it's a little bit different. So now, do we want to get on board? Do we want to, what do we want to do?
Yeah, we haven't talked about it any more than what you just said. Was in the past when there's been a couple of issues that came up in town. We talked about it a bit, but we have not talked about it in relation to the governor's new policy. So that is something we'll do, but that, I don't know if that'll happen before town meeting.
Was there a time frame on that, Patrick, as far as the opt-in or out of the? Do you know, Joe?
For some reason, I feel like there's an opportunity if we act before.
There was a date
June
on
30
it.
There's an opportunity if we act before June 30th to be able to count whatever revenue we might get from it in the projected revenue into the FY20 budget. So there is a date in relation to how you would project revenue. I can double check with Donna.
So I'd say that might be a follow-up on sooner than later for your board. And last thing was just some Phase 2 zoning bylaw changes. A handful of years ago, we had a consultant come in, Mark Bobrowski. We worked on a lot of Phase 1 stuff. It went, I was almost going to say fairly well, but it went. And there was a few dollars left over to start some Phase 2 stuff. We looked at some cottage housing that didn't do so well at town meeting a few meetings ago. There was a handful of other things, GPOD,
Yep.
The Great Estates, senior housing bylaw kind of cleanup, and just wondering if you were looking at ticking some more of those off the list, or if you had new things on the list, and what the general consensus was for refining some Phase 2 stuff, or even refining some Phase 1 stuff that's already gone through, and if there's any tweaks that need to be done to it.
Right. Yeah, we tried to modify the Great Estates, and that didn't go over well. One other thing we need to do is look at the signage bylaw. That's going to take some time. Right now, the zoning board used to be the ones that administered that, and they've had issues over the years, and we've heard from people in town and business owners in town that it is a little bit cumbersome.
Yep.
So that's something we need to look at as well. The yard sign bylaw, Patrick has brought to our attention. The way it's worded right now isn't really conducive to allowing yard signs that are for the schools or for elections or so forth. It's a little bit cumbersome technically. So we're going to look at those. And then kind of the Phase 2 stuff you mentioned, the GPOD, might be a couple tweaks to that. But really, I think what's going to come out of our housing forums and this master plan update is what's really going to drive the next phase of bylaws, right? That Rick touched on earlier. So that's what we're kind of waiting for in terms of like major, potential major changes.
I mean, the lesson learned from the previous town meeting was that we need to build more consensus, do more research. So the process really was take a big step back, raise the money to do the master plan, do it really well, which they're doing, and then we can go back now and work on the bylaws.
More data,
so
more public outreach.
unfortunately, it took more time, but it's going to get the right result at the end.
Right. Exactly. Let's see what people want. Right. What kind of housing do we want to address the needs that we have, and then go from there. So that's what happened in the last master plan, 2004, 2005. A whole list of potential bylaws was put into that master plan, and a lot of it was implemented. A lot of it was done over those next 7-8 years, which was great. So we're hoping the same thing happens with this one. But again, it is about building consensus and about getting people on board with potentially different types of housing than what we're used to. And again, it took a little while to get a senior housing bylaw.
Yeah, and that one we even put a sunset on it to get that one through.
Right.
So
3 town meetings to pass that.
Yeah.
Right. And we've people were saying, oh, we're going to be overrun with these, but we've had what, 2?
2, right.
So when one's not even built yet. So
Right.
I think that's.
I think that's a good plan. I think that section of the master plan is going to be key to where it goes in the future, right, for the planning board, for
Right, which is the main reason we are focusing on that portion, not the whole thing at once. With everything that's been going on in town, revolving housing and 40B and affordable housing, this was the thing to tackle now.
Yeah.
Put our time in, so that's why we're doing it this way, and we'll do the rest of the master plan at a slightly later date.
And just one other thing on that. A key component of this is a financial analysis of what are potential recommendations, how it might impact the town in terms of revenues, because I think that's the key was left out. You know, people say, well, gee, I like this kind of housing, or I don't like this kind of housing, but we didn't have any kind of objective data that says, well, okay, here's what, you know, everybody doesn't like paying taxes. So what happens if you build the $1 million house versus cottage housing, for example, or cluster housing? And, you know, so what's more advantageous to the town or disadvantageous to the town in pursuing? So we at least have some data. So people may say, I just don't like it, but you can say, well, wait a minute. Okay, let's talk about what you're willing to trade off financially. Do you want to pay more taxes, or would you like to have the opportunity to pay less?
Right, the cold hard fact is the more houses we have and create in town, the more tax base we have to spread around, the less our tax rate is, in theory.
In theory, in theory.
No, I don't
A
think
little bit of that. I would say that's the
Yeah,
case.
it's that broad of a brush, because then you've got kids in the school system that you have to account for on average.
Well, depending on the type of housing you build, right?
Right.
We're gonna have,
You just can't,
Patton Ridge is our second highest taxpayer in town.
And Canterbrook will
Canterbrook's
be,
probably gonna be the highest.
it will be the highest. So, and
Right.
No kids.
right, I'm just saying you can't
Right.
use
Right,
broad
you
brush.
can't,
Yeah, no, I know where you're going, but.
right, no, I mean, and that's the whole point is, we'll be looking at different types and say, okay, this type, this is what the impacts are going to be.
Right.
So that you can make rational choices.
right, yeah, that makes total sense.
I'll be interested to see that financial
Yeah.
analysis. Because I think that certainly there are costs associated with having families and kids in the school, but there's also a strong argument to be made that the economic development potential of people living in that age bracket between 25 and 50 tend to contribute more to the local economy. They spend a lot more money. They do more for the local economy. So wanting to keep those folks out of town doesn't help you. I think that we're already on a trend where the town's population is aging, and I'm not saying that we want to do anything to be unfriendly to that segment of the population, but we can't have just those folks living in town. We need to have people in all different age brackets and different points in their life here. That lends to the vitality of the town, it lends to the sense of community, and it lends to the local economy, what you have available to spend.
Yeah.
And, you know, yes, there are costs associated with having kids in the school system, but there are fixed costs with the school system no matter what. We have the school system. I'd rather have kids there where the parents are contributing tax dollars to help pay for it, as opposed to just trying to continue to afford that school system with the finite number of homes we have.
Right.
So there's a
Right.
there's a balance that needs to be struck.
Enrollment's been dropping over the last 10 or
Right.
12 years, so we gotta.
Right.
Right.
So there's a balance that needs to be struck there.
Right, and the key, and you know, Fred Mills has said it for years,
I was
right?
just going to say that.
Yeah,
His annual speech
it's getting
at the
people
varied
in
housing
early.
stock,
It's getting young people here early.
Right.
Keeping them here throughout
Their life.
having kids.
Yeah.
Keeping them here as seniors. That's how
Right.
you get the most tax benefit out of
Right.
it, right?
A third, and a third.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Relatively speaking, I had a chance to look up some of the numbers, but, you know, Rick, you had some numbers. We had, in the last 6 months, we had 49 houses sell. 17 of them were for less than $500,000. That's 35% of our housing stock was less than $500,000. So to be in a metropolitan area with a school
Well,
system.
no, you're taking a snapshot and imputing that to our entire housing stock. I mean, I can
The
take.
last 6 months.
Yeah, in the last 6
Sold.
months, but that's,
Sold, yeah.
so I can tell you right now, there are 3 houses on the market that are under 500,000.
Right.
So, you know, so you got to be careful.
Both
that-
houses for
And,
sale.
and those houses, most of them sell like that, right? Most of them. Because that's what a lot of
That's
people
what
are
people
looking
are
for.
looking for,
Yeah.
So,
But we've got that stock, which is good news. We
We
should
have
be happy
some,
about
but
that.
we're losing it though. That's the problem. We're losing it because you're losing it because they're starter. Well, for here they're starter homes, a lot of
Right.
them, right? And people then come in, fix them up, add on to them over time potentially, and it doesn't. It's not always a starter home, right?
I can just say-
it prices out of the starter home
Right.
category over time.
Right, to Brian's-
Not all of them, but some
To
of them.
Brian's point, just in our neighborhood, Brian and I live pretty close to each other. There's probably 3 homes, at least in the neighborhood, that were that $300,000 range that someone's bought, refurbished, added on to, and now it's a $700,000 house, $600,000 house. So that whole $400,000 thing is out the window in our neighborhood, which is traditionally $300,000 to $400,000 homes.
Right.
So we're cutting that demographic out of our neighborhood.
Right.
So it's a difficult thing.
Very complicated.
Very complicated.
Yep.
But before we let you guys go and we move on, if there's any other questions or comments anybody wants to say?
Any other bylaws, or is that?
I think we touched on them all, right? Did I miss
I think we
anything?
got 'em all.
I've been checking them off as I went
Yeah.
through, so I think you hit them all. I got a
The
dash
one thing
over
I'll add
some
while
more
people are
ones, so.
maybe thinking about something to add, if they do have something, is that I want to commend the planning board on all the work you guys did on the rules and regs. It's not really the big thing that gets the town meeting, but very important. We really needed an update on that, and I think the way that you guys went through it and did it all and buttoned it all up and closed all the loops and stuff, really important to moving forward with all this other stuff that we're doing to keep that ball rolling and make people aware of what they need to do when they come to you guys, and make it very much clearer, as we did with the Phase 1 bylaw additions, making it clearer for everyone to understand and organizing all that in a good way. So I think that's really
I just want to take, since you brought that up, I want to give a shout out to Ann for the very hard work she put in. She was a real taskmaster in terms of wording, punctuation, meaning, definitions. She held our feet to the fire, and she did it all on her own. So while it was painful, we thank you.
Anything else from anyone else?
No.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the update.
Yeah, this was good.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yep.
So
We're a little bit behind on our agenda tonight, so we're going to skip our consent agenda. We won't.
come back.
You mean
to it.
just move it
Come back.
later?
We're just going to move it
We're
down
gonna
a
skip
little
it
bit
all,
in the docket here. Yeah. So on our agenda, we'll start with Ann. Ann's going to present the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program and request some support for it. She has some slides for us. Stuff's in your packet.
And is it Exhibit A that you wanted up, or did you want the other? Which slideshow did you want me to put up? That one there? You weren't going to use it? I wasn't going to go through that at all. Okay, we'll save that one. We've got 3 others that we have to do tonight anyway. We sent it to the board. You sent it to me, I sent it to the board, so they have it. Do you want me to try and pull that 3 pages up? No problem. Do you want me to try and pull that 3 pages up? Is that Exhibit A or C? C, I think.
I sent Annabella something.
That's that one there. That's the 3 pagers.
Well,
No?
Do you want to start with an overview?
Yeah, sorry.
Or explaining to us what exactly it is?
I don't think we need to go through that. That's 26 pages. I can, I actually had 4 pages attached to a memo.
That's in your packets.
Okay, we have that.
These are 3 of the
This one here, I think.
pages.
That's this one
And
here.
that. So it's those 4 pages
Okay.
that you just talked about,
Perfect.
that you just showed. The reason I'm here is to describe a program that's called the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, and it's a program that was established by the Commonwealth about 2 years ago to help municipalities plan for the impact of climate change and to start to take action to address and mitigate those impacts. It's a program that I learned about a year and a half ago when I went to a Greenbelt seminar. I mentioned it to Sean a few months ago and asked him if he was aware of it. He said no and thought it would be helpful if I describe it to the entire board. What happens is if municipalities decide to participate in this state program, you can get state grant money to help you. You can get state grant money to help take you through the planning aspect of it, where it's a community-based process. You get people together, you have workshops, you come up with a list of what your municipal's vulnerabilities are to climate change. You come up with an action plan, and then phase 2 is you actually can move forward with some of those items on your action plan, and you can get additional state grant money to do that. When you go through the process, you use the state data on climate change and climate change projection. And this is the data that Massachusetts is using now. When I saw this at a Greenbelt presentation about a month or two ago, I was quite surprised by some of the numbers. And again, these are numbers that the Commonwealth is using in their own climate change planning. Sea level rise 11 inches since 1922. I had not been aware of that. Growing season has already increased by 15 days. Temperature's already going up since 1895. If you could go to the next slide, yep. Joe. And this is what they're projecting. And they'll show a range, so you can be at the low end of the range or the high end of the range, but these are averages, again, that the state or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is using for their own planning. Temperature is going to go up by 7.2 degrees by 2090. Days above 90 degrees, 34. I mean, that's more than a month. The range is 11 days to 64 days, so even if you're at the low end of the range, we're going to have a lot hotter temperature. Sea level rise could be 4 to 10 feet, and a lot more days when we're going to have more than 2 inches of precipitation in that particular day. So this is what they're trying to get municipalities to think about and plan towards. Some municipalities are already feeling these impacts, the coastal communities and different communities that are subject to a lot of flooding. And a number of communities are already working in this MVP program to try to address these. If you could go on to the next slide. This is just summer days over 95 degrees. We're going to be getting a lot hotter. And then the next page. This shows the communities in Massachusetts that are already participating in this program. 43% of the communities are already in the program. They're either in the planning stage right now, or they've already gone through the planning stage and are currently getting action grants. Wenham, I believe, is in the planning stage right now. Communities that have already gone through the planning stage and are currently have received action grants are Ipswich, Gloucester, Manchester, pardon me? Essex and Gloucester. Essex and Gloucester. So I think there are a lot of communities already doing it, and the issue is whether Hamilton wants to participate in this program as well and get the benefit of some of this grant money. The issue is if we're going to participate in the program, we have certain things that we need to agree to do as well. So for the planning process, you can get grants of between $10,000 and $100,000, but you have to commit some staff time to it. They are estimating the staff time is between 120 and 200 hours. For this particular process, and you have to use their planning process. You just can't do your own process. You have to do a process that's called the Community Resilience Building Process, and it's a process that was developed by the Nature Conservancy. It's being used across the country to help communities plan for climate change. And when you get these grants from the state for the planning process, the grant money is for you to hire a facilitator who's been certified in this particular process. The facilitator helps the community gather the information, helps put it together with the state information, helps conduct workshops, helps to produce reports. Just so that you know, the required workshops is you either have to have one full-day workshop or 2 half-day workshops that are attended by a broad section of your community and your business partners. So this is a serious undertaking. You really have to commit to it. When you go through the process, you end up with a list of your action items for your community. You then give that to the state, and they certify you as an MVP community. And once you're an MVP community, then you're eligible to apply for action grants to start to implement some of these action items that you came up with. Not all action items qualify for grant money. The state has a priority on what they call natural solutions. So they're not going to give you money to build a seawall. They might give you money to help buy more land or uplands for the marshland to migrate into. They'll give you money to rebuild culverts to get larger. They'll give you money to do, one of the examples they gave at a presentation I went to is if a community is concerned about the heat, and if you have a council on aging, they won't give you money to put air conditioning in, but they'll give you money to plant trees. So they're really focused on communities using this grant money for nature-based solutions. A community can get up to $400,000 in grant money, but the grant money will only cover 75% of the project. The community has to kick in 25%. And there are certain time commitments. You have to complete the project and spend the money within a certain period of time, so you can't take years to do it. And the other thing is, if you go through the planning process and you come up with your list of action items for your community and decide that you don't have enough bandwidth to jump right into some of these projects, you can't just sit back and do nothing and then still be eligible for an action grant in the future. Every year you have to file a progress report with the state in which you describe what progress you're making on your action items, and you have to do that to continue to be eligible for grants going forward. So it is a process, and it is something that if Hamilton wants to take advantage of it, you have to be all in. I don't think you go halfway in and then pull back and wait 5 years and whatever. I looked at what some of the other communities have used their action grants on. Gloucester is going to be doing a study of their watershed and water supply vulnerabilities. Salem is doing a study on how to deal with an old sewer main that's in a very vulnerable location that's constantly flooded and is subject to ocean action. Peabody is going to be doing a study of its flooding in downtown area and going to be repairing a crumbling canal wall and designing a river walk. Ipswich is doing a study of salt marsh resiliency. Newburyport is looking at wastewater treatment plant resiliency. Manchester is doing a design for restoration of Sawmill Brook and Central Pond. Natick is doing tree planting to mitigate heat islands. And Brookline is doing some low-impact development bylaws. And all those things are being funded 75% by the state pursuant to these action grants. So with that, I think I've said as much as I absolutely know about this program. Joe may know more because he had some experience with it in his prior life, and it sounds like you know a lot about it.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so there's any one of a number of people here to answer the questions you might have.
Joe, you have anything to add to?
So actually, she did a very good job, so I don't want to poo-poo what she said. I don't want to let her poo-poo herself. I think that you did a great job. You did a better job explaining the full program than I would have. But I do have experience with it. I brought it to Winthrop in its first year, and while I was in Winthrop, we also got money for an action grant in the first year of the action grants availability. It is a very intensive community-based process. You do need to do a lot of outreach. We were able to get over 60 people to commit to spending 8 hours working on that workshop to develop the action plan. We'd need to do something similar. Hamilton's a small community, so I think if we got 40 people, we'd be in really good shape. The staff time isn't as onerous as it sounds. 120 hours total for the whole term of the planning process isn't that long, really. It's a couple hours a week. Over the time that you're doing it. I managed that process in my role in Winthrop during that time. And you can choose from a long list of over 200 different certified municipal vulnerability preparedness facilitators. The state went through a rigorous process of training them, and they have to be on the list, but you can pick anybody off that list that you want to use. I know of several. I considered several and went before we went with who we went with. So I'd urge that the board support it. This would be the first stop of many. We'd also need to go to the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, a couple of other committees to get their support as well in order for us to file the application to get into the planning process. And the planning process is paid for 100% by the grant. You wouldn't need to put anything except for your match is the staff time that you commit to the project. It usually takes a couple of months of planning. Then you have the one-day workshop, and then there's another, 8 to 10 weeks for the consultant to do the report and help you file the necessary paperwork with the state. But you get the right, if you get the right consultant, they do a lot of the work for you once you have them on board. And I endorse it. I think it's a very good program. Winthrop, obviously being a coastal community, was much more impacted by the impacts of climate change right now, but I could see it happening here. I drive occasionally in and over Bridge Street, in and out every day, and the Miles River looks like it's getting mighty high these days.
From projections and saying we might be a coastal community if it gets to that point.
So and the other thing to keep in mind is that all those projections that she pointed out that Boston and the state are using in their planning projections, that's recommended nowadays. If you want to get state or federal grants down the road to help you with your infrastructure projects, you're going to have to plan it to those standards. The state and federal government aren't going to give you money unless you know where you sit in relation to the rising tide, how you sit as far as resiliency to heat, and whatever other impacts are covered. This is also a pretty timely thing for us to consider as we do look at our hazard mitigation plan update. There's a lot of information that gets drawn out in the HMP program that overlaps with what goes into this plan. Ann and I did exchange emails briefly about, why couldn't we just use MEPC to do both plans? Technically, we probably could have. The problem is that, as you know, we're under a time crunch to get our HMP plan done, and we're not even in line yet for MVP. And I don't want to take the chance of missing the opportunity to get reimbursement on those federal reimbursements we have out there. We have the money in the budget, in Tim's budget. We've identified a source to fund the contract with MAPC, but we could either extend that contract to include the MVP stuff and let the grant pay for it, or we could bring in a completely different consultant to look at it. I have thoughts both ways. I love MAPC. I used to work there, but there are some other really good companies out there, and it doesn't hurt to have a different set of eyes sometimes look at some of these things. So if you have MAPC doing a lot of the work for the HMP and somebody else comes in, looks at their work, and then gives you a different lens as you do the MVP program, that might be beneficial to us as well. So I think it's a great plan. I think the board should consider endorsing it. I was very happy to hear that Ann was so enthusiastic about the program, because I do believe that these types of programs work best when there's a significant local resident component to it. It shouldn't just be driven by the staff, shouldn't just be driven by the elected officials. So to have somebody like Ann being willing to put herself out in front of it, I think that gives us a good leg up on having it be successful.
Comments? Bill, Jeff, Scott?
I just want to digest it all, but it makes sense. I don't see anything negative about it, so I just want to make sure. It's the right thing to do.
There's no urgency for you to, it's a rolling grant application timeframe to get into the planning process, so we have to, do some work. We have to go to some other committees. I think Ann and I can talk offline the next couple of days about figuring out how to get this on the agendas of some of those other boards and committees. If you guys would consider bringing it back up for a topic of discussion at a future meeting and vote to either move forward or not, that would be a big help to us. I don't know if the representative has something to say.
So the only thing I would add is if you need some more information on this, this program has worked very well in Manchester by the Sea, Ipswich, and Brendan Zubricki of Essex was our leader. We did a lot of this actually regionally, and we were able to get 2 grants because we were looking at the regional from Newburyport all the way down to Gloucester Harbor. So I would reach out to Brendan Zubricki, who has been phenomenal and knows this program inside and out. Looks like Joe does as well.
What grants did you in Manchester?
So we got the planning grants first, and we were one of the first in the state to do as well, to get those grants, and now we're taking the next step to apply for some action grants. And we meet on a regular basis, I think 4 times a year. We bring everybody together to talk about this program. So reach out to those 3 communities, and I think they'll answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
And could I also ask, Brad, do you think that group has the ability, if we can get our planning grant done, do you think they'd have the ability to add us into their regional look at things? Because certainly, a small town like Hamilton doesn't sit in the world by itself on these things, and we aren't necessarily a coastal community, but we're coastal adjacent. Those towns have some heightened needs, but we might benefit from partnership on this stuff. So.
And actually, 3 of the towns I mentioned abut you folks.
Yeah.
And you talked about Miles River, and there's one of the lakes that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
Moving forward, they would be more than happy to. And again, Brendan's the key person for that.
Great. Can I put you on the spot, Representative Hill, for one more thing?
Yes.
Speaking of Miles River, has there been any action in the Miles River Task Force stuff with the Army Corps of Engineers?
So because of the funding that's going on at the federal, lack thereof, things have come to kind of a halt.
That's what I figured.
However, we're still pushing forward with the 4 communities, and actually within the next 30 to 45 days we're going to have one more meeting where we're going to have all of the players at one table to talk about how we're going to move forward.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
Duke, you want to say something?
Duke Seaver, Essex Street. I remember a program called CPA when there was only a few towns, and we did well. And then everybody jumped on board, and the money dried up. And I'm looking at that map up there, and there's probably half the cities and towns that are for this, and some are thinking about it, we're thinking about it. I'm afraid it's going to dry up like CPA money did.
Do you know where the funding comes from?
The funding comes from an annual appropriation from the state. The governor has to put it in, but the difference is that it's not tied to the tax rate. And it's
Unregistered deeds funded,
right. It's different, and given the fact that infrastructure sustainability and resiliency to climate change has been a huge issue for all the communities in the state and for the state government, and the cost of that stuff is just continuing to go up.
Right, and I would think that the state would see it as money well invested, because if these towns are building infrastructure to handle that, they don't have to deal with the FEMA and all that, et cetera, right?
So I'm always worried about what Duke just brought up, because you never do know. It's subject to appropriation, but I can assure you, other than education funding, which we're going to be undertaking in the next few months, global warming is probably the #2 issue that the legislature is going to be dealing with over the next 2 to 3 years. And the governor, this is his top priority, actually.
Yeah, right after education, right. He talked all about climate change program. He established a whole new subset in EEA. So
this is going to be millions and millions of dollars that are going to be pumped into these programs.
Thank you.
And just so
for the foreseeable future.
Thank you.
Just so you know, too, Ann was very correct in saying that they focus on green infrastructure type of projects, but if they will help you move infrastructure if it's in a vulnerable position. So they're not really into hardening of sites, because it's been proven not to work. All we have to do is look at Hurricane Katrina and see what happened to New Orleans. You can't just build the walls high enough to avoid it. But while they won't won't do hardening. They will allow you to move infrastructure that's in a vulnerable position. So this process is very, very key to identifying which of your infrastructure is vulnerable and needs to be addressed. And if there is ways to address it, the program will allow you to do that. So.
And actually, the infrastructure programs that we're interested in, like dredging, seawalls, and things of that sort, we've actually moved into what's known as the Mass Works program, and a lot of the funding will be through those programs and those grants to take care of those needs. This is something a little bit different, but we now have, I would say, 2 or 3 programs that are going to be dealing with this issue.
Gotcha. Scott?
Joe, you've got experience dealing with this. How much volunteerism do you need? There was a couple seminars and that kind of stuff and work sessions, but what kind of sustained community support do you need? It's good to have a standing group of advisors, people who help.
It would be helpful to have somebody besides Ann, kind of rallying to our cause on it. If the board and the other boards and committees in town decide to support us with, letters of support as we file the application, we can ask each of those groups to, try to assign somebody to a working group. I would ask you guys to consider asking Ann to, help lead that working group, since she was the one that kind of, like I said, I was thinking about it already, and when she sent that email to you back in December, I was like, awesome, this is great. I love to see it come from the community as opposed from me. So, if she'd be willing to take that on, I think it should be an asset to us. She's well known in the community, well respected, and if we could get a group of 4 or 5 people to help her out, and with the staff time that we'd have to put in to match the grant, we could easily pick an appropriate vendor to help us with it, consultant to help us with it.
Good. Well, that's the thing, Joe. You're doing a great job. You're still new, and love the enthusiasm that you bring here. And I think you're learning. There's more and more to the job, oftentimes. And it seems like the essence of a lot of what you shared and the state evidence is, even though it feels like a global thing, there's things we need to do ourselves for our own town.
Yep.
This is what this is focused on, like our own needs, which I'm always big fan of. So anything that helps us do that analysis and planning, so we can help prioritize what those things are that we should be working on with good experts and good community support, is really good.
Seems like a no-brainer for me. I mean, we're talking about sustainability and climate change, and it seems best practice for me with all of this type of stuff.
To me, I think structurally it's also important how we set stuff up for success. We've been struggling of late, I think, getting people to sign up for committees. If this was a working task force of the town manager,
yeah, I think so.
And others could be
more fluid,
called, used as ad hoc as needed. I think it gives a little more flexibility to what the requirements are, and as long as that's okay with Joe and the town manager, I think that's a good way to make sure it goes.
Great. In fact, I was going to kind of suggest more of a working group task force type of a thing. That way people can commit to whatever time they can
well, let's ask Ann. Ann, do you mind working with me? All right, good.
Ann said okay.
I think that sounds good. Yeah. Yep. Happy to have smarter people than me at the table. That's awesome.
All right. Do we want to think about it, or do we want to endorse it tonight and have Joe reach out to the other boards and committees and see if they'll support it as well? I would entertain a motion if somebody wants to.
The town manager recommended. I move that we phrase this one, recommend the adoption of the municipal vulnerability preparedness program. The town manager forms a task force to do exactly that and reach out to other boards and committees to solicit their support.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you very much, Ann.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ann.
Thanks, Ann.
All right. Our next. I think our next thing here is
slowly but surely. We have National Grid presentation on improvements to the Hamilton system. We have Representative Brad Hill with us tonight as well. You've already seen him, made a few comments. Welcome.
Congrats on your basketball win on Friday night.
Yeah.
It's a tough game.
And I apologize, gentlemen, I don't know your name, so introduce yourselves.
Yes, good evening, everyone on the Board of Selectmen, Town Manager Domowitz.
Yeah, just turn that,
My name is Dave Gendel. I'm with National Grid. I've been with the company for quite a few years. I'm a director with them, and also I have Andrew Bellevue right behind us. Andrew is a operations manager, and what we'd like to do is just kind of go over where we are with some of the improvements that we're making in the town of Hamilton. And let's go to the next slide, because we can talk just briefly about what we're going to cover tonight. We'll talk a little bit about how the town is supplied electric energy. We'll talk about our plans for improvement and also some comments on some double poles, an ongoing issue with all of our communities. And then, and I shouldn't walk too far from the microphone, we'll talk a little bit about some communications improvements that folks in the town can take advantage of. And then open it for any questions and answers. But before I forget, I just want to thank Scott Madden for his input, along with Town Manager Joe Domowitz, who I work with in Winthrop on some reliability issues there as well, and also Representative Brad Hill for their patience and professionalism in working through this issue. And a big shout out to a man in this town that wears both hats, your DPW Director and Tree Warden, who we work with quite a bit, Tim Olson. So with that, let's talk a little bit about what the system looks like. In the town of Hamilton, we have basically 3 electrical feeds into the town. And I promise I won't go heavy on the jargon here, so we'll just do it one time. The 51T2, which is the big feeder, that's the one we're going to talk about tonight. The other 2, the 18L2, and these numbers tell me where the feeders start from and what the voltage is, that kind of thing. And then the 51L3. Those are our 3 main cables in. But the big one that we're going to talk about tonight and where we're going to get the biggest bang for our dollar is the 51T2. Now that's a long feeder, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but it starts in East Beverly. It runs through Wenham, Hamilton, Essex, and it ends up in Gloucester. And that feeder is backed up by 2 or 3 other feeders, which we'll talk about. There are other supplies that we can tap into to help with it. And one of the challenges with this is that because Ipswich is a municipality, they have their own electric supply. There's no opportunity for us to tie into Ipswich. So a lot of what we have to do is fortify this line and make sure that it's doing everything it's supposed to do. But again, it does travel through some communities here. I want to talk a little bit about what we're showing you below on the left.
Dave, can I
yes.
interrupt with a question first or
Sure.
clarification? One of the things that was really news when you were in here and met with Joe and Brad and I was that point about it's a very long supply line for a number of customers. If there's an outage, which Dave is going to get into, if there's an interruption in there somehow, it impacts a lot of people, and there's not a lot of other ways that are easy to recover from that. They're going to talk about mechanisms that they're starting to do it to make sure that's more reliable, but that was kind of new news to us. We didn't know, like, why. That was kind of the question of why are we so vulnerable, it seems like. Well, it's kind of one long line that supplies a whole bunch of our towns.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Scott. What I'm trying to show below is the substation on the left, let's picture is in East Beverly or Beverly, and now you go all the way out to Gloucester. Well, if you took a pole line and you built a pole line in the middle of a field and you strung some wire, it would operate indefinitely without a problem. But once you introduce some trees and some animals and an occasional pole hit by a vehicle, you get all sorts of problems out there. So what we do is we put these R's represent a piece of equipment that senses that if there's a problem, they can open and close and they can backfeed. So if we had a problem between where the star is, for example, if we had a problem there, the natural feed is for it to come from the substation in Beverly feed to Gloucester. If it's between those two, what we call a recloser, what it will do is it senses the loss of voltage and it shuttles back and forth and it allows the back feed to come down. So you would have, and I know I'm walking away here, if you have a problem here, this would open and this would open and this would allow us to back feed to this point. This all happens automatically. The reason I mention this, because it's important, is that you may see a 30-second or 45-second interruption. Causes everybody to reset their clocks at home. It's a nuisance. We get it. But that, to us, is the system working appropriately. That's an important point here, because a lot of times people will say, I got an interruption last night. I had to set my clocks. 30 years ago or 20 years ago, you wouldn't even you wouldn't even have noticed it, really. But that's the system working the way it's designed in order to provide that kind of backup. So why don't we go to the next slide. In my company, like any company, you try to base anything you do on data. So we ran some studies on what this feeder looked like in 2018. And, you know, I think the main point here is that you see quite a bit of activity having to do with tree issues, whether they're tree limbs or trees falling or broken limbs or anything to do with trees was significant on this feeder. Now, we've got some other things up here. Like, I doubt that animal contacts is 0. I bet you that number is a little bit higher, but we have ways to protect about that. Same thing with vehicles. And we've got a couple of other things over here that I'm not overly concerned about. We can talk about them. But the takeaway from this slide is that what we're seeing out here is tree issues.
What's sorry to interrupt. What's the blue? I can't quite read.
I can't see that the word.
Yeah, let me see on mine. I had this
corrected. I tried to look at the printout, but I
No, I got it right here. I shifted them around. That's deterioration of equipment, 12%. We have device failure. Device failure is an interesting one because you could have a fuse blow in a transformer, and the fuse is supposed to blow. Could be caused by an animal. So when the clerk gets the data in, they may code it as a device failure, when it may not be a device failure. It's the device, it's doing what it's supposed to do. But I don't want to lose the point here. The point here is that the indication that we've got tree issues out there is really important to us. That's the takeaway. And that's what, if anybody in my company that works with Andrew on the operations side will tell you, trees and electric wires, always a problem.
I would go one farther, though. If I'm looking at equipment deterioration and device failed, you are at the same level of tree and broken limbs, 40%.
Yeah, and again, you know, when you get into device failure, I don't know if we were talking about that in the office as to exactly what that means. Even down below, other company activities, on this voltage of this particular feeder, we have to de-energize it a lot to work on it safely. Mm-hmm. So you get some activity along those lines. The device fail, it could be cross arms, it could be an insulator, it could be whatever. You know, but again, I come back to the trees as being the big one.
I think there's a couple takeaways I can amplify a little bit.
Yep.
When we had a lot of our neighbors in here complaining about the most recent outage, one of the things that, we don't know what the causes of things were. So when we saw this data, I don't know why that wasn't presented in some other way, but we got it, which is great. You know, we're finally getting information, and I've been encouraging National Grid to create with more of a standard presentation that even during a poll hearing, here's an opportunity to give an update and what's happening. So, and I do think even though yes, there's equipment related issues that fail or deteriorate, or the issues related here, I think the key thing from our standpoint, the public and the people in Hamilton, is they're going to get into this a little bit much more detail, but it's all about the trees. This is the biggest thing that we can do, of saying yes when they ask if they can trim, if we can accelerate the work with the planning board to have tree removals done more quickly. Anything we can do related to that has the singlest big impact that we control.
Right.
Things that we might be able to do.
Right. If we can keep those lines clear, that really negates a
Huge
lot,
help.
40% of the problem.
Huge help, huge help. And it's the same in
60, right?
Boxford.
If you're talking tree fell plus broken limbs, you're at 60%.
We deal with it in Westford, Chelmsford, Tingsboro. Those heavily treed areas are very susceptible to problems like this. What we're going to do is talk a little bit about what we're doing, and I'm going to have Andrew say a few words here. Andrew?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Go to the next slide.
So, thanks again. So David mentioned, my name is Andrew Beliveau. I'm the operations manager for electric operations on the North Shore. So my team serves electric power to 27 communities here in Massachusetts. The big takeaway for my team, really, operations is where the rubber meets the road. So we're the guys that go out and we fix the power when the power goes out. We do proactive work to keep the lights on. The message I wanted to deliver is we are out actively working in Hamilton every single day. When I saw that pie chart, the biggest thing we turned around and did is we jumped on our in-staff arborist. We made sure we had our tree contractors lined up, and it turns out it's actually right within cycle for trimming here in Hamilton. We trim on a 5-year cycle. This is the 5th year. This is actually a picture from crews working last week on Bay Road here in Hamilton. You can see there was a representative from the planning committee who had mentioned he saw Asplund. They're out there working, and they'll continue to work. We have between 5 and 10 crews working in Hamilton on tree trimming every single day. We've made some decisions in cooperation with the town. Thankfully, there's a good relationship here. We're trimming beyond sort of our normal spec. Certainly working with Tim Olson, he's been a huge help for us to sort of go beyond what our statutory rights are, because anything we can do to expand that limit just gives us that much more chance of reliability in the system. There were some residents that reached out and initially did reject our request to trim in those areas outside, but after subsequent conversations, our arborist, the contractor's arborist, Tim reaching out to the residents, we were able to get all of those approved, and we've continued to go through that. So you can go on to the next one. So our plans for improvement, right, it's really focused immediately on tree trimming. So we're within that 5-year cycle. We follow the feeder path, so we're not restricted to just within a certain municipality. We start in East Beverly and we work our way out, so we're going to trim the entire feeder. As Dave mentioned before, that's important because even though the feeder starts in Beverly, it can have an impact here in Hamilton. So we want to go
all the way up to Gloucester, basically.
Exactly. Yep. We do receive mid-cycle trimming requests from Tim and other arborists, and so we take those under advisement. I always try to mention versus what gets trimmed versus what doesn't. Our major focus, right, is the main roads, it's the main lines. Oftentimes residents ask us, can you trim, the little service to my house? That's not within the program. We try to accommodate that best we can, but our focus really is that main line that provides power to the most people. The other piece that we've worked well with Tim is the hazard tree mitigation program. And so that's something that's beyond the right-of-way, beyond the public right-of-way that we have. We identify between the National Grid arborist and Hamilton's arborist, the tree warden here, Tim, what are trees that are either dying or dead or potentially a hazard tree to the system, and we request permission from the homeowner to cut those proactively. So you can picture the 100-foot pine tree that is set way back from the road that's going to fall and take out the line. If it's in the right place at the wrong time, you can see it can cause a big impact. So.
One of the things that the National Grid shared with us too is that it's not like an unlimited right to trim either, even though they're trying to push that envelope as much as possible. And if there's trees that are 100 feet tall and leaning, doesn't mean they can get to them. So it's not like this vertical forever right that they can do. And unfortunately, at times those limbs are gonna fall too and cause a problem, even if they're on a regular tree trimming program.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And I think we had, I think it was in Hamilton last year, the year before, we had an instance where a tree came down, not on the main thoroughfare. It was way off on someone's property, and we had trouble getting out even to get to repair the line. And so have you done anything to reach out to those property owners and stuff that have off the beaten path lines through their properties to see if you can have an arborist go out and look and see if they can do some work in those areas?
We have, and that's part of the cycle trimming that we do, is we maintain those relationships. We make sure we can always gain access to that, because where there is equipment that's off the beaten path, like you mentioned, we have to have access, right? I think in the middle of a storm, that's the wrong time for us to be clear cutting and doing what we need to do. So,
not that this is affected with this particular supply line, but during the storm last winter, Boxford area, when they lost all that electricity, they actually had to go through a farm to get to their property, and they had worked out a deal with the farm in order to make that happen during these bad times, because the mud is so bad they can't go down the usual road to get to where they need to go, so they have to go on private property, and they actually have reached out to many of them, I've been told, up in that neck of the woods. It doesn't affect this line, but does affect
that line.
Ipswich.
Correct.
Actually.
Yeah. Yep. So in addition to the tree trimming, Sean, you had mentioned other components. We are taking proactive steps to ensure the feeder is operating appropriately. Obviously, the biggest piece is our tree trimming and our active cycle there. In addition to that, we're conducting monthly patrols of the entire feeder. The entire line gets ridden, and we identify pretty much anything that needs to be repaired, replaced, maintained. As a result of that, in the recent months, we replaced 6 poles, 3 cross arms, and 3 transformers that were all in need of repair. I can tell you, as the patrols continue, we continue to identify more and more items that can be upgraded or replaced or maintained. In addition to that, we deployed a relatively new piece of technology. It's something that National Grid has experience with, although I'm not sure in every community. We used a thermoscan. It's a piece of infrared technology that actually measures heat signals coming off of the electric grid. And we actually went pole by pole throughout the entire feeder, and we identified potential hotspots. The reason that's important to an operations person like myself, those hotspots are things that pieces of equipment that haven't failed yet, that are soon or likely to fail. The reason we really want to do that is because if it hasn't failed, we have the opportunity to go up and replace it without taking an outage. Because the crossarm hasn't burned down, the pole hasn't broken. So we can do more proactive work to keep the system running as it should. There are 2 major things. That we're going to install a switch in the vicinity of Woodbury Street, and we're going to install an additional recloser on Essex Street near the intersection of Woodbury Street. That's important because we're adding more technology to the system where we can reduce the size of outages in the unfortunate event that something does happen. Gives us a better ability to tighten up that outage space even tighter, impacts less residents. Again, you may see some of that on and off as the system operates, but that's completely normal. In fact, most of the technology that we use now, the reclosers are completely automatic. They'll work without human intervention at all, and many of our switches can be operated remotely. We have an operations control center in Northborough that controls those switches, and so before someone even drives out, they can evaluate that and
so
reconfigure.
The recloser and the sectionalizing switch on both of these on Woodbury, these are kind of bringing National Grid into the 21st century in Hamilton, basically?
I wouldn't say that, right? There's always things that we can do, and as we evaluate the health and success of each of the feeders we do, we identify, or we have a whole engineering team that's looking at what strategic things can we do over the course of any feeder. These were 2 of the biggest things that popped up as engineering looked at the feeder and said, these 2 items can have the biggest impact if we go out and do that. Certainly, from my perspective, the more of these we put up, the better. But it's sort of about what's going to give you the best outcome. So those are the 2 right now. Certainly, as we continue to patrol, we may find more.
Right.
And of course, we'll continue trimming out the rest of the feeder. You should see that complete within the next 6 weeks or so. One thing that I like to talk about is double poles, because as we make infrastructure improvements, one of the side effects is you may start to see double poles. Now, right now, there's about 2,800 poles in Hamilton. 19 of those are in sort of a double pole status, which is less than 1%. It's certainly among the best communities in the North Shore that I see, and really in the state. It's a result of upgrading the system, right, to bring taller poles in. All the poles are jointly owned by National Grid and Verizon, and so there's sort of an agreed process that we use across the entire state. There's a database that manages who has the ball in their court. National Grid installs the poles. We then transfer all the electric wires over. Each succeeding utility or third-party attacher then moves theirs sort of in that order that's diagrammed up there, and then Verizon's the last one to transfer, and they remove the old pole. So I bring this up. There is a process. We're managing it. In my opinion, I think we're doing well right now in Hamilton. There's certainly some areas we could probably do better. I wouldn't be surprised, given the amount of work we're doing on this feeder, for that number to rise temporarily, but I assure you it's something we actively look at and manage. So we'll work through that as it comes. And the last piece that I wanted to talk about, I know communication was something that came up at our meeting last Monday. How do we create better understanding for the residents about what's really happening, why are things happening, so that when they see a pie chart of outages, they're not surprised by it. One of the easiest ways, I think, is to broaden the adoption of the National Grid app. Within the app that you can use on any mobile device or on our website, there actually is an outage map. and it'll show you where those outages are. You can see, here's a screenshot, I think, from my iPad the other day. It'll show you exactly what's going on, how many customers are affected, when it started, and then the important part is what's their estimated time of restoration. And so piece that I bring up is my team for an operations. We measure our success against how well do we meet those estimates, and the crews that go out, right, there's a sort of a standard 2-hour that gets applied to every outage, but throughout problem identification and restoration, the crews are constantly calling back into dispatch to update those times. So we try to give as best of information as we can to the customers in real time. So if you click refresh on this, you'd see a new time. It may go shorter, it may go longer, but it's based on what the real conditions in the field are. And I think that's one of the easiest ways that customers can do to stay informed for what's happening right now.
I've used this app and it worked pretty well, so
good.
I think it's well developed and works pretty quickly. So
good, I'm glad to hear that. That's excellent.
I think when maybe Faith was in here or someone else was talking about when you call or you update the app with your outage, to make sure that everyone kind of does it. Don't just look at it. It may say, one customer out, but there may be 50 people out. So the encouragement was for everyone to kind of report the outage. So there was more of a database for you guys, and more of a, if there's just one person out and you're looking at 100 people out another, you may visit the 100 people first, but there may be people that didn't report the outage in the other percentage. So the encouragement was for everyone to try to report the outage via the app or a phone call or whatever, so that you had that data and would know how many people were actually out and when they were out and et cetera. Is that correct?
Exactly right, because that data actually helps the system diagnose what the problem is. And then there's always an opportunity that we...
Just to the mic, sorry.
Well, the point I was going to agree with you on was that data helps us analyze where the problem is. And then there's always an opportunity at the end that when we think the problem is solved, there might be a remote problem that's in the same neighborhood that has nothing to do with it.
There may be a pocket that's still out or something.
Exactly. We need to go back and look at those. So that's it. We will continue to work it on our end. We understand completely that the loss of power, it's aggravating, it's frustrating. What we're going to do or what we're doing on these trees, it's going to make a big difference. That's not to say that we're not going to have a pole hit or an occasional outage like that, but this is going to make a significant difference in the reliability of the system. And I've got Andrew is new with us, but he's all over this, and we're partnering with the town as best we can, and we hear you, and we're a phone call away, so we'll come back to see you.
Can you just give us a little bit more of a more technical answer on how the reclosers are going to work and how they do work?
Sure, absolutely.
If you don't mind.
So the recloser is mounted on a pole.
Andrew, would you step right up to the mic? Because
absolutely.
then people at home will see what's going on.
So the way the reclosers work is they're basically an automated switch with sensors built into them. And so they're basically feeling current on both sides of the pole, both upstream and downstream from where they are. What it triggers on is, if you can imagine a tree contact, you're going to see a huge amount of current increase on that, and so that's really what it's reading. When something comes in contact with ground, the electricity goes to ground as opposed to continuing along the wire. The reason they're important is because most of the time the tree doesn't just come in and knock the wire down. Most of the time it's a branch that hits it, might make contact with a cross arm, there's a little short circuit, and it knocks right off. And so in that case, the recloser you'll see in operation. So it will automatically sense that current go out of whack and open up, and it'll close that section that we talked about in between the two reclosers down, and automatically, after a predetermined period of seconds, will close back in. It'll basically try again to see if that failure knocked off and the system is clean. We all go on our merry way. There's no reason to bring a crew out. There's no power outage. It actually will do that 3 times in longer periods. So you'll notice if the lights flash at maybe 3 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, where it's waiting to see if the wind is blowing and it's going to knock something right off. If it doesn't after that 3rd time, it stays in the out position. The others will operate and it'll isolate that down. And that then triggers our dispatch to send out a crew and start to evaluate what really is the problem. But
so as you've been looking at the line, and we asked you a few weeks ago to do a soup to nuts look at the entire line, which it sounds like you've done, and identified some issues. Will there be more closures replaced or put into place for this particular line? Because what we did learn, and we were all very, very shocked, is that if you were to build this system today, we would never put this line as long as it is now. And when it was built, it was a unique situation. So I guess I'm trying to understand, and I want the people to understand, that because this is a unique line, that you are looking at this very differently, and the equipment that you're looking to replace now is going to benefit and help us in the future. Is that an accurate statement?
It is, and so I've asked my team during these monthly patrols to look creatively at the way the system is configured, you know, certainly we're going to be adding these reclosers in. This is the first one that's been identified. As we continue to go through it, there may be others, in addition to some of these switches that aren't automated, but they are still smart switches that we can operate remotely and certainly help to shrink it once we get a human set of eyes out there to identify really what that problem is. So we're thinking creatively about how to configure the system and continue to provide the reliable service that is needed. So
a lot of this started with our double pole issues and heat and whatnot. It shows how even a little community thing can apply a little leverage, and I think that National Grid, these are folks who are here, we've asked to come to see us. They are responsible for the operations, for capital investments. They actually make the decisions about what gets invested in different places. So having them here, we greatly appreciate. I know Hamilton's not the biggest community in your territory, but we suffer an awful lot of outages. So that continual info flowing, more updates that come to us as they're available is really, really useful to us. So we've got a new policy about the double poles because we're still trying to force action more also with Verizon. But I think Brad's been great for decades staying on this, but we learned some new things even as recently as last week, and I think Joe's appearance on the scene has smoothed a lot of things as well, reaching out to some of the right folks, so we're getting new and better information. So from my perspective and hearing a lot of the public feedback and I'm right in the corridor of outages all the time. It happens all the time where I am. Thanks for coming out tonight, and I think we need to stay on this to say as the investments need to continue, but these are the folks that are right in the firing line of making those decisions.
So I think a direct question, what's the future look like? You've told us what's happened up to today. What's going to happen tomorrow?
Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things that when we looked at this line, it's about 15 miles long, and it's a mix of what we call open wire. If you go back to a couple of slides back to the double poles, go back a couple more, one more. Let's try one more after that. No, it's not on there. All right. But it's a pole with a cross arm. You got two insulators. That's an open wire. When we do future work, we're going to be putting in Hendrix cable, which is a more packaged cable. Right now, about 50% of the line is Hendrix. It's a line. I was going to bring a sample of it tonight to show you guys, but it's just it's like a diamond-shaped configuration.
Yes.
And they use that through treed areas because it just takes up a smaller amount of space. And also, when the branches fall on something like that, they're more apt to roll off, to come off the line. So it's been a great performer. Right now, half of this line is Hendrix, half of it's open wire. So any of the investments that we're going to be putting into the line, where we might have to put taller poles in, replace poles, the engineering folks would absolutely go with a Hendrix construction on that. So, I mean, what's up there is fine, it's working, but as we replace for things coming up, we'll go with that. And really just keeping an eye on it and going back, as we talked about at our meeting, just the basics of making sure that things are grounded, that the insulators are good, the cross arms are healthy, the poles are in good shape, and keep on the tree trimming. You know, if we get any other issues, this is going to make a big dent in it. And we'll just keep up on it with spot trimming after that.
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask. We obviously want to see you continue working on this line. We get the most calls here in Hamilton about this, but I also get calls about Wenham. So putting you on the spot, and I hate to do that, but is anything going on in Wenham similar to what's going on in Hamilton as we move forward to try and bring electricity into a couple of towns that are having issues?
Sure, sure. And so I think everything that was said tonight likely also applies to Wenham. The two towns they're on the same feeder. They're basically intertwined electrically when you think of it that way. So any improvements that we can make upstream in Hamilton or downstream in Wenham impact positively both communities. So the more switches and reclosers we put on, the more Hendrix cable we install, the more poles we replace, we reduce the risk of outages, and that positively impacts any community that's on this line.
Because what we're seeing is the line up on Essex and Woodbury, but as you continue down there going toward Gordon College, they're also seeing numerous outages in the same time frame as when Hamilton is. And a lot of the neighbors have reached out to us since we started meeting with the Hamilton Selectmen to ask if you can just, don't forget about Wenham either.
Understood.
What else can we do to help, either us or the citizens do to help report problems? You only know what you know, so how do we help get information to you guys?
I think the best thing, right, whenever there's outages, report it as soon as you can so we can get out there and identify it. But be proactive when it comes to identifying those hazard trees, right? Work with Tim Olson of the DPW. He has a direct line into working with us. I think we have a pretty good track record of getting out there and taking care of some of those right away. So if folks are driving around the road or even on their own property, identify those. Or those trees that may be, like I mentioned, the 100-foot pine that's 100 feet back that has an opportunity if folks are interested. We're certainly willing to make those investments to remove the trees or trim the trees in such a way. But I think we have a good partnership, and working with ourselves and with Tim, we seem to manage things pretty well.
We talked about the scenic roads. Were you here? We talked about scenic roads earlier, so we're going to try and change that bylaw as well to get those trees down quicker and not have to wait for 2 or 3 meetings.
That'd be a big help.
Yeah, this was our view. Everything we can do, we want to do.
Any other questions?
We also said, call Joe.
Yeah, call Joe.
They have my number, don't worry.
I really appreciate you gentlemen coming tonight. It's great to have this dialogue with you. I think up until this point, we've been working on establishing a dialogue, but we're really thankful that it's happening now, and really look forward to continuing to improve the service to Hamilton with National Grid, and hopefully these improvements will really make a change in our citizens' lives. And it's Duke. Did you want to say something?
Yes. Duke Seaver, Essex Street. You own some of the poles, and Verizon owns some of the poles. Can't you get an agreement with Verizon on the poles that you own, that you're not going to let them do any work on it unless they take the old pole away?
Actually, the way the pole ownership works, under what we call joint ownership, we own the poles. 95% of the poles are owned jointly with National Grid and Verizon. And years ago, it used to be done on a territory basis. So Hamilton might have been our custodial territory. Salem was Verizon's, and it was a little different working with each community. The new setup that we have in place is where we set all of the JO poles. We do it all. And whether it's nighttime, and then Verizon, who's the last one off, is the one that's supposed to take the pole away. Whether it's a side set pole or whether it's a cut and kick where there's a pole butt there, they've got to take it off. So we're in the first year or so of that agreement, and I think it's working good. So we're gonna continue down that path of working our way down the poles, making the transfers. We do it first, then we have to have CAT fee and fire alarm, and Verizon's the last one. When they go out to transfer their wires, they take the pole with them. And I think that's going to work out.
Okay.
Yeah, well, time will tell, but I think it's been working out.
Don't give them permission to do something else until that one's finished.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
All right, anything else for these gentlemen? No. Thank you very much,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Andrew, thank you.
Yep.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out, too.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Hill. Thank you to National Grid representatives again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Want to mix it up for a quick second, do the consent agenda? I don't think it's going to take that long.
Mr. Chairman, it's your meeting.
That is true. So let's move on to the consent agenda really quick, and then we'll jump back into the agenda. On the consent agenda, we have approved minutes from the Board of Select meeting on January 7th, 2019.
Hey, good to see you.
Approved minutes from the Joint Board of Selectmen and the Finance and Advisory Committee on January 7th, 2019. Appointment of Chris Davis to the Open Space and Recreation Committee for a 3-year term. Appointment of William Kerr to the Open Space and Recreation Committee for a 3-year term. And appointment of Russell Camp to the Chabaco Woods Land Management Committee for a 3-year term. And last but not least, the Hamilton Wenham Friends of the Arts request for permission to host the 24th Annual Melody Miles 5K and 5-mile road race on Saturday, May 25th. The route and insurance certificate is attached in our packets.
I move that we adopt the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Any comments on anything? Good. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. All right, back onto the agenda. First reading of policy converting private streets into public ways. We spoke about it just briefly with the planning board members when they were here. And I think basically we've talked about a first step of folding in some waste and plowing issues.
So if I may, I took notes during your previous discussion, and I have here notes to have edits amend the private streets public ways policy, underground infrastructure, trash, and snow plowing. So basically, we'd be asking Tim Olson and Patrick Reffett to propose a little bit of language to add to this policy that would allow you to include the cost of underground infrastructure being upgraded as well, and and noting that both trash and snow plowing would be taken over by the municipality once the private way was accepted as a public way.
And, Mr. Chair, at this point, I recommend, like we do sometimes with financial policies, we do a first reading, we refer them to the FinCom for review, they give us some advice and comment. I suggest here we refer to the planning board, ask their formal review and edit, and then pass it back to us before we adopt it.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Anybody else have any other comments? No, I think if Joe works on incorporating those changes or inclusions into it, I think that's only going to help us out for sure. And then have some opinions from the planning board, et cetera, the all interested parties, and then collect any of their comments and then circle back to us and we'll look at it again.
So 75% of the affected property owners, was that, how did we get to 75%? What was that process?
I believe that was borrowed from the Canton bylaw that we modeled, that they modeled this after.
I don't have a problem with that. I was just curious how we got there.
I think it was from the Canton one.
Okay.
Which we can always tweak that number or get a suggestion for what someone thinks.
I'll, certainly I'm interested that it has passed in another community, and there must have been some threshold they were held to, but I'll double check and I'll have Donna take a peek at it and see if she thinks that there's anything that leaves us open.
Because I think
I don't want to create,
legal
neighbor lawsuits for each other. Hey,
I think when we had the planning board looked at it years ago, Bill, I think before you were on it, I think it was 100% buy-in on it,
right,
if I remember correctly.
The previous one I looked at was 100% buy-in, so.
And so, because that was a thing, because it was, the whole neighborhood had to agree to split the cost among the whole homeowners group. And I would imagine if you're doing 75%.
I'd be interested to know how Canton came to 75% and why that was allowed.
I would think it almost had to be, I would think it would have to be 100%. Right? I mean, if you have one person that says, I'm not paying the $20,000 or $50,000.
It's on my deed.
It's not on my, then the whole thing doesn't work, or someone gets a free ride, kind of.
I think part of it is to get the application moving too.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they actually did any given road being accepted, but even if there's somebody who doesn't want to do it, if everybody else is saying, we're doing it and we're paying.
Right, regardless of.
At least it allows it to move forward. And not one person going, no, this is never changing.
Right.
I think functionally you may wind up at 100% on most of these anyway, because, like you say, with the private way, the road is owned by the individual homeowners. Most of them, their property line extends to the middle of whatever the road is.
Right.
And you're not going to get them to give up
the easement or whatever,
the easement and the deed without them, without a long court case and everything else. So I really, whatever number you pick, I don't see a lot of these coming forward to
without
you.
100%.
Without 100%.
Right.
Right, just for the property thing alone.
Yeah.
So, all right, food for thought then. It'll circle back to us.
Okay.
Any other comments on it before we move on?
No.
Okay, perfect. Review key recommendations of the fiscal year 20 budget by town manager and summary feedback of the joint FinCom Board of Selectmen workshop, announce public hearing dates. So we had a joint meeting recently. We went over the budget in somewhat of detail. I got the higher level review. We delved into a little bit of the micro stuff. The big kind of takeaways from it is that we've got a bit more of a budget increase than we did last year. Last year was really a skeleton budget for all basic means. This year we've got a little bit of increased staff. We're looking at an assistant DPW director and some HR representation, which hopefully another community will jump in with us and share. But those were kind of the big cost drivers besides the usual health insurance and benefits and the like that we really don't have much control over.
Right. So I did shrink down the PowerPoint that we went through with everybody on the 7th, but I don't have to go through it. It was just if you wanted me to do that. I have something available to refer to. I think the important things that we covered too were kind of how the tax rate got set and where does the tax rate get split up among the various costs for government.
Right.
I think it was pretty telling. It's instructional and helpful to remind people that just under 60% of our tax revenue goes to fund the schools, and that about 88% of all of our revenues in town come from property taxes.
Right.
So increases, no matter how much we minimize them, will affect our residents and our property owners. And as somebody else pointed out too, we're in an interesting phase where property values are climbing, so your assessment goes up, your property's valued at more, and then the tax rate goes up a little bit. So I think Jeff said that at a Board of Selectmen's meeting, not the meeting with the joint meeting with FinCom, but it kind of almost winds up being a little bit of a double hit for folks.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, but that's the only place we can get our revenue from. If you count local receipts and the property tax, it goes up to 93% of our revenues in town come from property owners. So that's.
I think that was the other big takeaway. I'm glad you touched on it. Was that we had Marissa and you got together and broke down the different components of the tax rate. So once the schools,
Here.
once it goes operational, et cetera.
I'll just fast forward through this to this here. This is the tax rate breakdown, and this is a little bit more granular, but it shows you that, general government includes, kind of the finance and administration pieces up here, town clerk, the things that go on generally in this building. It makes up, in the current FY19 budget, makes up $1.10 of the $16.48 per thousand of valuation, right? The public safety, police, fire, ECOs make up $1.54. The regional school district makes up $9.85, and when you add in the Essex Aggie, that's another 11. You're getting really almost to $10 of the $16.48.
Right.
Goes right to the schools.
Right.
Public Works is only $1.04. Health and Human Services is the Council on Aging. So we referenced earlier that nearly 30% of our population in town is senior.
It's 17 cents.
Is senior, and they get 17 cents going to their services, all right? So that's something down the road we're going to need to look to make some investment in. Culture and Recreation, Parks and Rec, again, is right there at 51 cents. And then the unclassifieds make up, they're small pieces, but when you consider capital, debt service, retirement, health insurance and life insurance, property and casualty insurance for the town, you get, the bulk of the rest of it right there. The reason I like this particular graph is it shows that for FY 18-19 and going into 20, what we proposed, we're pretty steady. You're seeing a little bit of an increase on the general government side of about 4 cents per thousand. You're seeing a little bit of an increase on the DPW side. Those are largely related to the two small positions we're talking about, but particularly the position in the DPW department has an opportunity to give us to provide us with ways to make that operation even more efficient.
Right.
We currently have an understaffed department. We have an overworked manager who doesn't have enough time in the day to do both the long-term forecasting and projecting out what he can do, and also the day-to-day, getting the work done. He needs help there. And that my honest assessment is that he needs help there. I'm proposing that we add that assistant director so that we function better and we can show results for that down the road.
I think the
in other areas.
I think the basis of the discussion we had at the meeting with the FinCom was that it was spend a little money to save a lot of money with that position in particular.
One example we gave you, we're in the ballpark of 80 to 85,000 or something like that for the salary for an assistant public works director. If you look at the lapsed hazard mitigation program,
the grant money.
The grant money alone is 160,000. We're getting 75% of that back from the federal government if we have that HMP in place. Instead, now we're spending another $18,000 to have the plan updated properly, and hoping that we can get it done in time to still get 75% of that back. Right. We'd have that money in our coffers already if we had this assistant public works director on. We talked too about kind of the way the LED streetlights were put in and what maybe could have happened if we had done that with an assistant DPW director on board 4 or 5 years ago. We're spending a lot of money monthly right now in making repairs to parts of the system that weren't upgraded because we didn't have anybody here, and Tim wasn't even here at the time, that was able to take a look at the existing system and say, no, this is where you need to connect into, replace from here out. Instead, the vendor was allowed to do what was cost effective for them. And we got a good price on it. I don't want to criticize the vendor too much. Same vendor did our streetlights in Winthrop. But the system was just set up a little differently, and we're spending money monthly on maintenance that we didn't think we were going to have to spend. So those two things alone, if you had somebody in this role a couple years ago, you'd have saved that money back already.
Right.
So those are the types of things that I want us to focus on. Again, same thing with HR. I asked a consultant to do an assessment of our financial operations to help us make some decisions about how to improve efficiency and maybe make sure we have staff where it needs to be. And in doing that, what he noticed, and he reported in his draft report, that there were 4 to 5 new state and federal laws that govern human resources in just the last calendar year. So to expect the town manager or anybody else to do it as part of their job, it's unrealistic, and we leave ourselves open down the road to potential litigation or problems with employees. I see this as a small investment now to make sure that we avoid big costs later on, make sure we're doing things the right way, get those new policies implemented the right way, so that we don't have problems with our employees down the road.
Right. Any other comments from the meeting?
It was a good working session.
Yeah.
FinCom was there. They participated. So for the public knows, they do actually a deeper dive into budget development than the Selectmen do as part of the process, which they did. They met with department heads and looked at everything, and they haven't taken a formal opinion yet on the draft. But just like us, it looked like it reflected what the guidance we had given or shared in all of our joint meetings, and there was no significant difference between the Select Board nor the FinCom about what.
I think they're meeting this Wednesday night. I believe they'll probably take a look at some of that. And hopefully get back to us sooner than later.
Also, we were supposed to be meeting with them on Wednesday night per our calendar.
Yeah. But
it escaped me, so I apologize. And I asked Phil if he would be okay with rescheduling our meeting with them, because we'll be at school committee tomorrow night, and then I thought 3 nights in a row was a bit too much for us. So we'll be rescheduling that when we can. I think they've got another.
They are trying to reschedule. They also were,
We're supposed to meet with Wenham FinCom as well.
So they're meeting, obviously, with the joint meeting with the FinComs and the school committee tomorrow, but then they were supposed to meet on joint programs with the Wenham FinCom, and that meeting was originally scheduled for Wednesday night, too. So if we had both gone through with that scheduling, there would have been a kerfuffle anyway. The FinCom has asked if they could put that meeting off. So the Wenham FinCom has asked them to consider February 11th, which is next week.
And on the numbers, and more importantly, we haven't learned enough yet about the library budget, which is regionalized service. Everybody loves it, but that was also 6% increase in the first insight that we had to it without knowing what was behind that, just like the school district. So the the schools meeting tomorrow night's important because I think they're also considering making some changes. For example, in unison, both the Select Board and the Finance and Advisory Committee recommended that the school committee take out the school resource officer funding out of their budget because it was like now in 2 budgets, which wasn't needed. So those things have got to flow through a little bit, I think, before we have a practical next joint session with the FinCom.
Sure. And just so you know, on the joint program, staff is planning to meet this week. I believe believe Peter and his new finance director and Marissa and I are going to be meeting. I think it's either Wednesday or Thursday morning. We scheduled that, so we'll meet and start to trade some numbers back and forth before the meeting with the FinComs, and so we'll all be on the same page when we walk into the meeting with the FinComs.
So I'll circle back after I talk to Phil and we figure out another time to meet with them.
Right.
Right.
Sooner than later, most likely. All right, so next up we have Scott. We got a first reading of a formation of capital planning committee. Scott's going to present it. We've talked about it a little bit. It seems like a good best practice thing to do. I had a conversation with Catherine Harrison this last week about we're starting to do this. She was very interested in it as well. And looking to see if Wenham could do something similar, because I had talked to her and we've talked a little bit over the last year or so about getting together with the Wenham Board of Selectmen, our Board of Selectmen, the FinComs, and the school committee and talk about all our upcoming capital expenses and trying to coordinate, because we're all dipping out of the same pockets for the most part, in coordinating some of these capital plans and when they roll out. So, Scott.
So,
get your up
was
if you
the
want.
person who opened the door on this. He recommended we get moving on it, and so I took the lead on just doing some of the assessments. So by way of background, I looked at a whole bunch of other towns that are very similar to us, a few, 6 or so, that are very more similar to us, and also reflected on training that the Department of Revenue has provided to selectmen at various sessions. So these are all best practice things that are out there. So really simple agenda. Why do we need it? Make sure everybody's on the same page with that. What's a process? Simple step process, what we go through, and then what do we need to do? Our Board of Selectmen next steps so that we can move this forward. So why? Well, we want to win town meeting support for our capital budget. If it's taken a long time for the town of Arlington to get there, but they've had 27 years in a row of acceptance, almost unanimous, and never with any modification of their capital budget. So it's arduous, it takes a lot of time, it takes time to mature into having a good process, but it's definitely achievable. And if we look at all the things that we've been doing here lately in terms of our policies, I put a couple in green: financial policies and long-range forecasts. Those are things that we're doing. And the other third cornerstone, or third leg of the stool that DOR was recommending, is really good capital planning, because that's the really big projects long-term and how to do it. They have recommendations of how to adapt to that range of planning. Most important being kind of consistency. So go to town meeting with almost a consistent debt number. What the percentage of our revenue should be applied to debt. Some places are 5%, or they range around there. And I'll give you an example, like the town of Arlington, even though they've invested in big schools regularly, they've managed to keep that 5% number because they figure out ways to finance it, what's current operational spending, what they borrow, so that that debt element of their total spending stays very consistent. So it doesn't feel like surprises to town meeting. They're going, okay, yep, we've got a plan, this stuff's out there, it's being vetted, we'll get into the process a little bit more. And the idea of this as old debt is being retired, then what are new things? You have now capacity to do other things. What are those things? And balancing that of, as old projects are reaching their end of life, what's either maintenance, replacement of them, or other new things that we should consider. So the next slide is about the process. Not too complicated. This is direct from the training for selectmen. Pretty simple steps, which is it's a circular thing, but there's requests that come from, this says departments, but it can come from a lot of different places, different sources and needs. It might be the schools, it might be citizen requests of different kinds of things. We've got a town hall building committee, patent homestead. It can come from a lot of different types of places. And then this capital committee is engaging all the time, looking at all these things. They got a method of prioritization and assessing them so that they're being looked at and recorded, so that now there's actually a database of what are all the capital projects with key attributes that you can look at and go, okay, are we following the priorities we really have, or is there something more urgent that needs to trump something for some reason? So those people do it, and they come up with, which is essentially a 5-year plan, of which the first year is the current year's operating plan. So if you have a 5-year plan, think of it as if we had one right now, would go through FY19 through FY24, and we'd be operating with the current plan right now. So basically what's happening is at the Springtown meeting, the next one is basically the request for the approval of that plan, which is, here's the first year what we're actually doing, and here's what we're expecting to happen over the next 4 years. And as long as you're given good heads up early, try not to have surprises, generally people are understandable of what's going on, and that kind of consistency and conservative approach to planning is well respected in town meetings. And then, assuming it gets approved, and as I told you, the town of Arlington does a masterful job on it. They're the award winners from the Department of Revenue. Not everybody does it, but it can be done. And then that's releases funding at our normal fiscal year commencement of July 1, and the cycle just keeps on going. So it's there's a lot of detail behind it, and a committee that has to be good, which is really what the next slide is about, is the role and the membership. There's really a couple of key things, and sorry for being extra wordy here, but I took some things right out of the recommended charge for it. But the job is communication a lot across the town. It's very broad. That what are the things that we need to think about, and the priorities, relative needs of all those kinds of things. So what you alluded to, Sean, is like, oh yeah, everybody, the schools want to join in, or Wenham wants to join in. It's a natural thing. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy or super graceful sometimes, but it's Hamilton's planning committee, Hamilton's capital committee, so at least we know our position on things as they come in, things that are directly under our control, or, for example, things that are shared, library, schools, recreation, all those things that we share with Wenham. And then the second role is really, that's the heavy lifting of a capital committee, reviewing things, what's coming, knowledgeable of what the projects are that are in the town, and what it takes to do them, and what cost estimates might be behind them, and are they practical or not, and intersections with CPC about potential funding sources, or the finance department about how we might, is this going to be bonded, can we afford it or not? So that's the kind of, that's the real inner workings of the capital committee itself. So the skills that folks need are kind of senior a little bit here. It's somebody who's familiar with multi-million-dollar type capital projects, and and a reasonable familiarity with town operations. Like, how does a town work? It isn't always business aspects. Sometimes you need to understand how a governmental entity works a bit. So having some background about how does government work, and funding cycles, that kind of thing. Like the cadence of decisions that I mentioned up there are really important. Like, oh, CPC needs a heads up 6 months before they're actually going to vote on something, and they need to be in place before it gets to town meeting. So you need to know that whole rhythm of the town decision-making process. What's the budget calendar of the town manager and the finance director, and how do you go to the FinCom and explain here's what's going on and when, so they're getting the right insight and information. So it's I don't want to make it sound too heavy, but
candidates need to have a bit of experience, I think, in this role. And in terms of membership, towns they varied a little bit. I went to other towns, more importantly, that were had our town manager form of government with a board of selectmen. And a 5-member board seemed representative, and it was the scale of work that needs to be done too. I think I didn't see too many larger boards and a couple of smaller ones, but they were smaller towns, and I'm not sure that the capital committee had as much impact, and they weren't as fully fledged as the rest of this seemed to imply. And one of the things I think like some things in each town can vary a little bit. Like in our town, by our bylaws, the finance committee can't serve on another committee. So, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't be involved and be represented in what's going on. So we have this concept of liaisons to communicate back and forth, and the FinCom buys into this totally. They already do that with like us and a number of other boards. So that would work really well. Or the school committee or school operations, would we necessarily get somebody from Hamilton? We see the current balance of representation in the school committee. There's only a couple of folks from Hamilton. Well, but what do we really need? We need to know what is that school master plan and the operations behind it, and what's the strategy, what they're trying to accomplish. So there's a lot of ways to get that. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it's got to be a school committee person who serves on that. It can be somebody who knows enough of the school operations that and the scale of the projects that are there, and that relative timing, and what does MSBA funding look like, and likelihood of those things coming along. Because part of this organization, when this committee eventually stands up at a town meeting or gives the advice to the town manager for him to make the recommendation, it's got to have the credibility behind it to say, did you check this stuff out?
Right.
Is this the likely thing that's going to happen? Is that the right interest rates over 20 or 30 years of time? Does the town have the capacity to do it, both in terms of Prop 2.5 capacity or borrowing capacity? So you need to have the skills to tap into lots of different areas. So that's why also in our handout, it's a little longer, believe it or not, what's there. Arlington's charge for their finance committee, this award-winning DOR best.
You said it's very short and simple.
It's like one paragraph. But they've also evolved over 27 years. And they've got infrastructure and plans and stuff that are there. We don't quite have that. So I thought I need to do a little bit of best practices of a few other places so that the people getting into this are all going to be new.
Right.
So we'll give a little better sense of what should be happening. So that's why those roles are specifically carved out of it, and what are the right representative organizations to interact with in our town. So the next slide is really all about what do we do. This is our first reading. So I thought it was good to have a presentation to explain that we have available. The townspeople can see it. It's available to them. And then there's the detailed charge itself. So tonight is our first reading. We look at that. Now it's time for open comment. I'm the FinCom liaison. I'll make sure they get a copy of that and take a look at it. I think the CPC is a good point too, because they're a funding source that's often important. Those are linchpin, at least a portion of it that we get a lot of leverage out. So they got to see how this new group is going to be working. If there's more that we all think ought to be there, then that's right. That's what we ought to be doing. So this is really the first reading tonight, and then spend the next 3 weeks getting those comments so we get it back together again, because I think we need to have this in place. We're pushing the school committee for a capital plan and long-term master plan, all those kind of things. I'm a firm believer, we got to have our house kind of clean.
Practice what you preach. Right?
Yeah, so let's do our bit, show we've got this in place, and then they'll know how to play with us. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's you just talked about a group of 20 people getting together. Right. It's nice that everybody wants to get together, but that can be unwieldy. Like, what is the actual process and mechanism to do things? So I think if we form a capital committee, Joe's very supportive of it, which is wonderful, then at least we've got our shop in good control, and then we can interact better with both Wenham on any investments.
And then everything will kind of fall into place, and they'll maybe see what we're doing and do something similar, and then it will be a much easier dialogue to have when we've got that kind of format and the long-range plan worked out.
Absolutely.
How often do they meet in Arlington?
It varies. It kind of goes with the cycle of that work. So if there's particular projects that are coming along, like, there's a town hall building committee. Well, what's going on with the town hall build committee? They've got their own cadence and pace and what new numbers are coming out, so they got kind of a heads up of what's going on, versus the more intensive time of like really getting into a lot of the fiscal calendar that already gets produced. You know, the heavy lifting starts in the summer, fall,
right.
in winter, preparing for annual town meeting, which is the big decision about the capital plan, because the first year of it is actually, the first year of the 5-year plan is actually the next year's budget.
A lot of times, some committees that I've seen will have a scheduled monthly meeting, but they might not, they may take off, May, June, July, whatever. It's important to get them together again around August and start thinking about the requests that they've got coming in, and start looking ahead to the calendar, both in terms of how they're going to match up with the fiscal calendar, the development of the next year's fiscal calendar, and hearing out. I would ask Scott if you thought, while we're soliciting comments, I would love to offer this to the department heads and see if they see what feedback they can provide us.
Sure.
As well. One of the valuable things about this too is that, and I'm not suggesting this is the case here in Hamilton, but a lot of times, without this kind of a committee kind of helping vet things for town meeting and for the FinCom, you kind of get into a little bit of a popularity contest. Who's got the department head who shakes babies and kisses hands and walks around town and gets everybody to sign on for their thing, right, when it's time to vote at town meeting, as opposed to having an orderly process and an understanding of what the priorities are and why they're there.
Takes the politics.
It takes the politics out of it. Really puts some prioritization to the plan. All of our departments have needs on an annual basis. Which ones do we have to address this year, and which ones can we push off for next year or 2 years, because it's fair, right? And it doesn't overtax or overburden the taxpayer, I should say. So this kind of committee can kind of lend some reason to the process for the town meeting to consider, for the finance commission finance committee to get behind. And it helps the department heads feel like they're all being heard on an even ground, without having to run around and have side conversations to try and get somebody to. I'm not saying that happens in Hamilton. I haven't seen it yet, so I'm not. But let's avoid creating that kind of
right,
dynamic. So, first reading. That's the point. Any comments? You look at it. That's send them along. I'll try to incorporate all that. And Joe, I'll follow up.
I think it's
for
important.
You, all the department heads, ask them to take a look at it. And I think the FinCom and CPC are mandatory also.
I think it's important to talk. I think it's about the cadence of our debt service, and it spurred conversation from. We're looking at all that water stuff we want to do, and look at debt coming off. Maybe it's appropriate now to put debt back on. Yep. And it kind of spurred, we went over it, but with the school, one of the questions I have, and maybe tomorrow night for the school budget, but the school budget,
for the middle
same
school.
Kind of thing. They had $400,000 come off their debt service.
Right, they've got the middle school.
But the budget went up 1.4, so it really went up 1.8 if they'd kept that debt service consistent.
Right.
Because eventually it's going to go back on. So if they'd had that cadence and they'd planned better, they would have kept that debt service the same
level and
had a project in place to do that. So I think it's important to, if we can do it on our end, then we can. I think that's important, because if you don't see that, actually, the budget went up for school more, but it was artificially deflated because of that $400,000 debt service.
Right.
So, I think it's important if we can keep it consistent, not have surprises, not have peaks and valleys.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would do well long term. So I think it's a great idea.
Good. Well, thanks, Joe, for opening the door on this and showing like it's the third leg of the stool that the part we haven't done yet. And actually, it's not like every town's got these things. We're still ahead of the curve, even having the 2 legs of the stool that we've got, but doing this, besides our AAA bond rating and other financial controls we have in place, this is really going to be, I'm convinced after looking around the state, other places could be a really great thing for Hamilton.
I think we're doing great stuff. I mean, I just want to pat ourselves on the back here a little bit. We don't do it that often, but I mean, with our financial policies that we're doing right now, this capital planning committee, the capital 5-year plan, 3-year plan that we've done in the last couple of years, and the way we're presenting the budget now, we're doing really good. I think, we're being more fiscally responsible. We're looking really forward. We're not reactionary as much as we used to be. I think we're doing really good.
And just real quick, I forgot to mention before when you gave me the floor, another positive outcome of this is that with the committee putting these things forward to the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom and then to the town meeting, it's really easy for people to get into the habit of thinking, such and such department's complaining again. They need, they always need something. This isn't coming from the staff every year. This isn't coming from the department heads who are trying to, our department heads are always doing what they think is in the best interest of their ability to provide service to the residents, but it isn't necessarily always seen that way. This creates a matrix or a system by which people in the town can look at what's being asked and say, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because of A, B, and C, and we'll get up at the floor of town meeting and support those things so that people know it's not just something coming because the town manager wants a new truck in DPW or because, whatever the case may be. I think that gives people the comfort to know that it's not just a whim.
Right,
it's
been
something
reviewed,
that's being thought.
basically, right? So you've got people that have vetted it, and it's the right thing to do.
That's exactly, I think, Arlington's message. People looking at it relatively dispassionately. I mean, they're still town people, but in that consistency and thoroughness of evaluation and assessment is really respected.
Great.
So thank you, Scott, for doing all the work to put this together. This is awesome. Great. Saved me a lot of work.
Good. You got plenty to do, Joe. Happy to help.
Any other comments on the first reading here?
No.
Perfect.
Only comment I'd like to make in general is that if we talk about plus deltas, about meetings, I think this technology, using the PowerPoint, using the screen, I think today it shows how helpful it is. I think that, we should try and make that a goal. We have a presentation. We should try and use.
Yeah, I got to apologize for the meeting on the 7th. I didn't realize this computer was with Annabella, and I brought my laptop in here, and it doesn't plug in.
With
It isn't compatible because it's a newer computer, and this is an older modem type of hookup. So I didn't realize we had this one available to us. And when I was talking about it today, Annabella's like, "Oh, I got a computer that does that." I'm like, wish I'd asked that question 2 weeks ago.
Well, now you know, right?
So now we will try to have this kind of
I think it's very helpful
available to us.
Everybody. So
Yeah.
I welcome the technology and the PowerPoint. So good job.
All right, new business.
We have some carryover from tonight. We made an agenda change, so Allison's points, I think that's in there.
We have a lot of things working on stuff that we've been talking about.
I think, one thing I'll add before we get too far is I didn't put it on this agenda, and I probably should have, just a placeholder for any warrant items.
Oh, yeah.
I totally forgot on it. We didn't have anything new, but I think going up until we close the warrant, let's leave it on the agenda as kind of an open item.
I've got a small list already. It looks like you might need 1, 2, well, that one's probably may not be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9 different warrant articles that don't relate directly to the budget. So we want to make sure, probably at an upcoming meeting, we publicly state what those are going to be, and start to plan a hearing on them, right? You need to have a public hearing on them. So.
And we'll have that, and in the past, we've invited anybody that's sponsoring particular items to come and speak to them, etc. We even talked briefly about having another type of a warrant hearing other than just ours at one point in time.
So one of the things, Joe, for the warrant is, and we made a change for last fall when Robin was here, was we added a bit of explanation of what the article is.
Some narrative.
Which is a great way for whoever's posing something, start with that. Don't worry about the detail. Start with, what is your objective? What are you trying to accomplish? And do it in a paragraph.
Yeah.
And then the sooner we get that on any and all of these things, it makes a lot a lot easier. We can review it more publicly, easily here, and people start getting educated and not just go, oh, they show up at town meeting and don't know what's going on.
Yeah, the next meeting is the 25th, because the normally scheduled meeting would have been on President's Day.
Right.
And after that meeting, I think you've got one meeting left to try and officially close the warrant, because then we have to.
And you gotta go print.
We gotta go print and everything else, so we got a lot of work.
Right, like, for example,
short amount of time.
FinCom, we asked the FinCom for public information, like, do we need a separate, not just one warrant article for the school district? Like, last year we had a couple, and there were overrides in Wenham. Well, we got to be kind of in sync on that if we can, so we need to hear from them what's coming back too. So this week is important for them to also feed us and what we need to help structure the warrant properly.
Anything else?
No.
All right. That's it. And sure, there's a ton more from my list previously that we have, but
Yeah, well,
we can
I
fill
mean,
that in.
so I wanted to ask you that, Sean, and normally we do the week in between the meetings, we have a conference call on Monday with Scott to start to lay out the outline of the agenda. We've got 2 Mondays between now and then, although we got 2 weeks in between now and then instead of, or 3 weeks instead of 2. Do you want to do this next week anyway, so give ourselves plenty of time to make sure we have
That's just the week before.
Yeah.
Skip next week and do it the following week.
I think so. I think
The
that'll
following week, you got to be doing it on a Tuesday. It's going to shrink our timeline to get the agenda.
Well, let's do it later.
Because Monday's the holiday.
Because Monday's the holiday.
Let's do it later in the previous week instead of the
Okay,
Monday.
you want to, I'll send you a thing, but maybe we'll do it the Thursday before the Tuesday or something like that.
Yeah, that might work.
Sure.
Just because I still want to, we've been trying to get a little earlier on getting stuff out to people.
exactly.
So
That's
that
why I
would
brought it
kind of
up.
Go with that cadence a little bit and to give us a little bit of buffer to get more information on the stuff that we're trying to put in. Kind of an in-between, I guess. All right, anybody want to make a motion?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, everyone.
Dude, thanks for staying to the bitter end. As always, you're.
Yeah.